In the fog-choked shadows of a secluded Yorkshire manor, a priceless Egyptian artifact vanishes from a locked room, defying all logic. Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, is summoned to unravel a web of deceit woven by a cast of suspects, each hiding secrets as dark as the moors outside. A cryptic letter, a mysterious scratch, whispers of an ancient curse. Every clue points to an impossible crime. But when Poirot makes a rare mistake, the truth slips further into the mist. Who stole the star of Anubis? Why does the manor itself seem to guard its secrets? And can Poirot's legendary little gray cells triumph before the thief strikes again? Dive into a 30-second whirlwind of suspense, where every glance hides a motive, and every shadow holds a question. Chapter 1. The curious invitation. The autumn wind howled across the Yorkshire moors, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep through the very stones of Ashbourne Manor. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the journey's rigors, adjusted his Homburg hat as he stepped from the hired car onto the gravel drive. His mustache, meticulously waxed, twitched slightly as he surveyed the sprawling estate before him. The manor loomed like a sentinel against the gray sky, its Gothic arches and ivy-clad walls exuding an air of both grandeur and secrecy. Poirot's sharp eyes noted the uneven windows, some shuttered, others glinting faintly in the fading light, as if guarding secrets within. He had received the invitation 3 days prior, penned in the elegant, if slightly tremulous, hand of Lady Eleanor Ashbourne. The letter was a curiosity in itself, its tone both formal and urgent, requesting his presence for a weekend gathering at her remote home. A peculiar puzzle awaits you, Monsieur Poirot, it had read, one that demands the singular brilliance of your little gray cells. Poirot, never one to resist a challenge to his intellect, had accepted without hesitation. Now, as he stood before the manor, he felt the familiar thrill of a mystery yet to unfold. The heavy oak door creaked open before he could knock, revealing a butler whose gaunt frame and somber expression seemed to belong to the manor itself. Monsieur Poirot, I presume, the man said, his voice low and precise. I am Grayson, Lady Ashbourne's butler. She is expecting you. Merci, Monsieur Grayson, Poirot replied, his French accent crisp yet warm. He handed over his coat and cane, noting the butler's meticulous movements. The journey was long, but I am most intrigued by Lady Ashbourne's summons. Grayson inclined his head. This way, sir. The other guests have already arrived. Poirot followed through a dimly lit hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes, their eyes seeming to track his progress. The air smelled of old wood and wax polish, with a faint undercurrent of something less tangible tension, perhaps. The butler led him to a grand drawing-room where a fire crackled in an enormous hearth, casting flickering shadows across the gathered company. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne rose from a high-backed chair to greet him. She was a woman of advanced years, her silver hair pinned elegantly, her posture regal despite the cane at her side. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, belied her age. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to command, I am delighted. You could join us. Your reputation precedes you. Madame, you honor me, Poirot replied, bowing slightly. Your letter spoke of a puzzle. I am, as always, at the service of such mysteries. Eleanor's smile was tight, almost strained, all in good time. Allow me to introduce my guests. She gestured to the room's occupants, each of whom Poirot studied with his customary precision. First was Victor Ashbourne, Eleanor's nephew, a man in his early 30s with a handsome but sullen face. His tailored suit was impeccable, yet his fidgeting fingers betrayed a restless energy. He nodded curtly at Poirot, his eyes darting to the window as if seeking escape. Next was Clara Henshaw, Eleanor's maid, a woman of perhaps 40 with a pinched expression and downcast eyes. Her plain dress and tightly pulled bun suggested efficiency, but Poirot noted the way her hands clasped and unclasped, a subtle sign of unease. Mr. Reginald Hargrove, an American businessman, sprawled in an armchair with the confidence of a man who owned the room, His broad shoulders and booming voice filled the space as he rose to shake Poirot's hand with excessive vigor. "Heard you're the best detective in Europe, Mr. Poirot," he said, his grin revealing a gold-capped tooth. "Hope you're worth the hype." Poirot smiled politely. "I endeavor to be, Monsieur Hargrove." Finally, Dr. Penelope Wren, an archaeologist, stood near the fireplace, her slight frame dwarfed by the room's grandeur. Her spectacles and ink-stained fingers suggested a scholarly disposition, but her nervous glance at Poirot hinted at something more guarded. "A pleasure, monsieur," she murmured, barely meeting his gaze. The group settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Poirot, ever observant, noted the dynamics: Victor's impatience, Clara's deference, Hargrove's brashness, and Penelope's reticence. Each seemed to carry a private burden, and Poirot's curiosity deepened. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a long mahogany table gleamed under a chandelier. The meal was lavish roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a rich claret, but the conversation was stilted. Victor complained about the manor's isolation, Hargrove boasted of his latest business venture, and Penelope spoke vaguely of her work in Egyptian antiquities. Clara, serving silently, seemed to blend into the shadows. As dessert was cleared, Eleanor tapped her glass, commanding attention. "My friends," she began, her voice steady but laced with urgency, "I have gathered you here for a purpose. Beyond mere hospitality, last night a most distressing event occurred." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "The Star of Anubis, a priceless artifact in my possession, was stolen from my locked study." A murmur rippled through the group. Victor's fork clattered to his plate. Clara froze mid-step. Hargrove's grin faded, and Penelope's hand tightened around her glass. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "The star," Eleanor continued, "is an ancient Egyptian amulet said to hold great power. It was locked in a case, in a room secured from within. Yet this morning, it was gone. I have asked Monsieur Poirot to uncover the truth." All eyes turned to Poirot, who steepled his fingers thoughtfully. "Madame, you have presented a most intriguing problem. A locked room, a vanished treasure, and a house full of secrets set magnifique. I shall begin at once." The guests exchanged wary glances, and Poirot sensed the weight of unspoken truths. Victor muttered something about cursed relics, while Hargrove scoffed, "Probably some servant's sticky fingers." Clara's face reddened, but she said nothing. Penelope, meanwhile, stared into her wine, her expression unreadable. Eleanor rose, signaling the end of the meal. "Monsieur Poirot, you may inspect the study tonight if you wish. The rest of you, I suggest an early night. Tomorrow may bring answers." As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind already at work. The locked study, the missing amulet, the nervous guest, each was a thread in a tapestry he would soon unravel. He approached Eleanor, who stood by the fire, her cane tapping softly against the floor. "Madame," he said quietly, "is there more you wish to tell me? A detail, perhaps, not shared with the others." Eleanor's eyes met his, sharp and knowing. "You are perceptive, monsieur. The star is more than a jewel. Its history is complicated. I trust you will uncover not only its whereabouts, but the motives behind its theft." Poirot nodded. "I shall employ the little gray cells to their fullest." He made his way to the study, guided by Grayson, who unlocked the heavy door with a key from his chain. The room was a scholar's haven. Bookshelves lined the walls. A mahogany desk stood at the center, and a glass case, now empty, gleamed under a single lamp. Poirot's eyes swept the space, noting the heavy curtains, the polished floor, and the single window, latched tightly. He approached the window, his gloved fingers tracing the frame. There, almost invisible in the dim light, was a faint scratch, too precise to be accidental. Poirot's mustache twitched in satisfaction. "Aha," he murmured, the first whisper of truth. He examined the lock on the door and touched. No signs of tampering. The glass case bore no marks of force, suggesting the thief had a key or a clever method. Poirot's mind raced, cataloging possibilities. A secret entrance, a duplicate key, or something more ingenious. Returning to the drawing room, he found it empty save for Clara, who was clearing the last of the glasses. She started at his approach, nearly dropping a tray. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't see you. Pardonnez-moi, Mademoiselle Clara," he said smoothly. "I merely wished to ask if you noticed anything unusual last night. Near the study, perhaps." Her eyes flickered, but she shook her head. "No, sir. I was in my quarters after serving dinner." Poirot nodded, his smile disarming. "Of course, merci." As she hurried away, he noted the slight tremble in her hands. A nervous maid, a restless nephew, a boastful businessman, and evasive scholar each a piece in the puzzle. The scratch on the window frame lingered in his mind, a clue that promised to unlock more than just the study. Back in his room, Poirot sat at a small desk, his notebook open. He sketched a rough plan of the manor, marking the study's location, and the window's scratch. The Star of Anubis, he mused, was not merely a prize but a catalyst, exposing the hidden desires of those around it. He closed the notebook, satisfied with the day's progress. The mystery had begun, and Hercule Poirot was in his element. The wind howled outside, but within Ashbourne Manor, a different storm was brewing. Poirot extinguished his lamp, his mind alight with the challenge ahead. Tomorrow, he would probe deeper, and the secrets of the manor would begin to unravel. Chapter 2. The locked room riddle. Hercule Poirot stood in the center of Lady Eleanor Ashbourne's study, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the plush Persian rug. The room was a monument to opulence, its walls lined with towering mahogany, bookshelves stuffed with leather-bound tomes, their spines glinting faintly in the dim light of a single chandelier. A grand oak desk dominated one end, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkwell, and a small bronze statuette of Anubis, the Egyptian god of the afterlife. The air carried the faint scent of old books and polished wood, tinged with something sharper, perhaps the residue of Eleanor's perfume or the lingering tension of the crime that had occurred here. The Star of Anubis, a priceless artifact, had vanished from this very room, locked from the inside, with no apparent means of entry or exit. To Poirot, this was not merely a theft, but a challenge to his intellect, a puzzle that demanded his meticulous attention. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, his mustache twitching as his sharp gray eyes scanned the room. The other guests hovered near the doorway, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Lady Eleanor, her silver hair pinned elegantly, stood, with a regal air, though her hands betrayed a slight tremble as she clutched a lace handkerchief. Victor Ashbourne, her nephew, leaned against the doorframe, his handsome features marred by a sullen frown, his tailored suit slightly rumpled as if he'd been pacing. Clara, the maid, stood rigidly, her plain black dress and white apron immaculate, her eyes darting nervously to the floor. Mr. Hargrove, the American businessman, exuded a brash confidence, his loud checkered suit clashing with the room's understated elegance, while Dr. Penelope Wren, the archaeologist, clutched a worn notebook, her glasses slipping down her nose as she glanced anxiously at the others. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice soft but commanding attention. A locked room, a missing treasure, and a house full of secrets. This is a matter most intriguing, is it not? Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady despite the strain in her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you'll find the star. It's not just its value, it's a family heirloom, tied to my late husband's passion for antiquities. Its loss is personal." Poirot inclined his head. "Rest assured, madame, Hercule Poirot does not fail in matters of such importance. Now, let us examine the facts." He moved to the heavy oak door, testing the lock. It was a sturdy mechanism, old but well-maintained, with no signs of tampering. The key, Eleanor had explained, was kept in her possession, and no duplicate existed. The door had been locked when she entered the study the previous evening to find the star missing from its display case, a glass dome on the desk, now empty save for a velvet cushion. The case itself was intact, its lock unforced, suggesting the thief had a key or some other means of access. Poirot's gaze shifted to the windows, tall and arched, their leaded panes offering a view of the misty Yorkshire moors beyond. He approached the nearest one, his gloved fingers tracing the frame. There it was, the faint scratch he'd noticed earlier, a precise line etched into the wood, barely visible unless one knew to look. It was too deliberate to be accidental, too subtle to be the work of a careless hand. He filed this observation away, his mind already weaving possibilities. "Madame," he said, turning to Eleanor, "you are certain the window was locked?" "Absolutely," she replied. "I checked it myself before retiring last night. The latch is secure, and the glass is unbroken." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the other entrances to this room?" "There are none." "None," Eleanor confirmed. "The study is a fortress, designed by my husband to protect his collection. The walls are solid stone, the floor unyielding. There are no secret passages, no hidden doors." Poirot's lips curved slightly. "No secret passages, you say? We shall see." He turned to the group, his eyes narrowing. "Now, Ms. Amos, let us discuss where each of you was at the time of the theft. Precision, please. The truth depends on it." Victor shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his dark hair. "I was in my room, reading. I didn't leave until dinner." Poirot's gaze lingered on him. "And yet, Monsieur Victor, the gardener mentioned seeing a figure near the study window around dusk. A figure in a dark coat, much like the one you wear." Victor's face flushed. "That's absurd. I wasn't anywhere near the study." "The gardener's mistaken." "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "We shall verify." Clara spoke next, her voice low but steady. "I was cleaning the upstairs parlor, sir. I didn't come down until Lady Eleanor called for me, and you saw nothing unusual." Poirot pressed. "Nothing, sir," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mr. Hargrove crossed his arms, his voice booming. "I was in the library, going over some business papers. Didn't set foot near this room. You can check the library yourself." Poirot. "My cigar ash is probably still on the table." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A most distinctive trail, Monsieur Hargrove. I shall note it." Dr. Wren adjusted her glasses, her voice trembling slightly. "I was in the garden, sketching the manor's architecture. It's part of my research. I didn't even know the star was gone until Lady Eleanor told us." Poirot studied her, noting the way her fingers tightened around her notebook. "Sketching, you say, at dusk, in the cold of the moors. A curious choice, mademoiselle." Penelope's cheeks reddened. "I find the evening light inspiring." "Bien," Poirot said, clapping his hands. "We have our alibis, such as they are. Now, I shall examine this room further. You may return to your activities, but do not leave the manor." Hercule Poirot will have more questions. As the group dispersed, Eleanor lingered. "Monsieur Poirot, do you think the thief is among us?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Madame, in a house such as this, everyone is a suspect until proven otherwise. But fear not, Poirot will find the truth." Once alone, he returned to the window, crouching to inspect the scratch more closely. It was not a random mark, but a precise incision, as if made by a Tula knife, perhaps, or a glass gutter. Yet the window remained intact, its latch secure. He stood, his mind racing. A locked room, a missing artifact, and a scratch that hinted at something more. The puzzle was complex, but Poirot thrived on complexity. He moved to the desk, examining the empty display case. The lock was a delicate mechanism, requiring a key or exceptional skill to open without damage. He ran his finger along the glass, finding no scratches or smudges. The thief had been careful, meticulous qualities Poirot admired, even in a criminal. He opened the desk drawers, finding only papers and a few trinkets, none of which seemed relevant. But, as he closed the bottom drawer, he noticed a faint misalignment. In the wood, a hairline gap where the drawer met the desk. He pressed it gently, and with a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a small leather-bound notebook. Poirot's heart quickened. He opened it, finding pages filled with Eleanor's elegant handwriting notes on the Star of Anubis, its history, and its supposed curse. One entry caught his eye: the star must never leave the manor. Its power is too great, its secrets too dangerous. He slipped the notebook into his pocket, resolving to study it later. For now, it was another piece of the puzzle, a hint that the theft might be more than a simple act of greed. As evening approached, Eleanor insisted on hosting dinner, determined to maintain decorum despite the theft. The dining room was a stark contrast to the study, its long table set with gleaming silver and crystal, the walls adorned with portraits of Ashburn ancestors. The guests sat stiffly, their earlier camaraderie replaced by suspicion. Victor picked at his food, his eyes darting to Clara, who served with mechanical precision. Hargrove downed his wine with gusto, his loud laughter grating on the others. Penelope kept her head down, sketching absently on a napkin. Poirot observed them all, his mind cataloguing every glance, every gesture. He sipped his soup, a delicate consomme, and remarked, "A fine meal, Madame Ashburn. It is a pity the atmosphere is so strained." Eleanor forced a smile. "We're all shaken, Monsieur Poirot. The star's loss has unsettled us." "Understandable," Poirot said. "But perhaps the thief is among us." "Non." "A toast, then, to the truth. May it reveal itself swiftly." The guests raised their glasses, though their expressions ranged from wary to defiant. Victor's hand shook slightly, spilling a drop of wine. Clara's lips tightened as she refilled Hargrove's glass. Penelope's pen scratched louder, her napkin now a maze of lines. As the meal progressed, conversation turned to the star. Hargrove, emboldened by wine, leaned forward. "If you ask me, this whole Locktroom business is a setup. Someone's trying to make a fool of us all." Victor glared at him. "Careful, Hargrove. Accusations like that could point back at you, gentlemen," Poirot interjected, his voice smooth but firm. "Let us not descend into chaos. The truth requires order, method. Tell me, Monsieur Hargrove, why were you in the library so late?" "Business papers, you said. But what kind?" Hargrove shrugged. "Just some contracts, nothing to do with your precious artifact. And you, Mademoiselle Wren?" Poirot turned to Penelope. "Your sketches, are they of the manor's exterior only, or do they include the study?" Penelope hesitated. "Just the exterior. I'm studying Gothic architecture." Poirot nodded, though his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He turned to Clara, who was clearing plates. "And you, Mademoiselle Clara, you have served Lady Eleanor for many years. You know this manor well. Tell me, is there anything at all that struck you as unusual yesterday?" Clara paused, her hand steadying a tray. "No, sir. Everything was as it should be." Poirot smiled faintly. "We shall see." The dinner ended with no further outbursts, though the tension lingered like a fog. As the guests retired, Poirot lingered in the dining room, his fingers tracing the edge of his wine glass. He replayed the evening in his mind: the scratch on the window, the hidden notebook, the shaky alibis. The Star of Anubis was more than a jewel. It was a magnet for greed, fear, and secrets. And that scratch such a small detail. Yet it gnawed at him. It was a clue, he was certain, but to what? He retired to his room, a cozy chamber with a four-poster bed and a view of the moors. There, he opened Eleanor's notebook, reading by the light of a single lamp. The entries detailed the star's journey from an Egyptian tomb to the Ashburn family, its rumored curse tied to mysterious deaths centuries ago. One passage stood out: "The star's power lies in its mystery. To possess it is to court danger." Poirot closed the notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. Was the theft motivated by greed? Or was there something deeper, a fear of the curse, or a desire to harness its supposed power? He paced the room, his little gray cells working furiously. The scratch on the window frame was the key, he felt. It It suggested an attempt perhaps aborted to enter or exit through the window. But why leave such a mark if the window remained locked? Was it a distraction, a deliberate clue to mislead him? Or was it evidence of a tool, a method he had yet to uncover? He recalled the precision of the mark, its clean edge. A glass gutter, perhaps, but the glass was intact. A knife, then, but for what purpose? Poirot stopped, his eyes narrowing. Mon Dieu, he whispered, it is not what the scratch is, but what it is not. The realization struck him like a thunderbolt. The scratch was not a sign of entry but a sign of something else, something removed, perhaps, or something staged. He would need to inspect the window again, in daylight, to confirm his suspicion. For now, he was content. The puzzle was taking shape, the pieces aligning in his mind. The locked room was no longer an impenetrable fortress but a stage, and the thief, whoever they were, had left their mark. Poirot extinguished the lamp and settled into bed, his mind still turning. The star of Anubis would not remain hidden for long, not from Hercule Poirot. The next morning, he rose early, his energy undimmed by the late hour. He returned to the study, the dawn light casting long shadows across the room. The scratch was still there, its precision even more striking in the clear light. He examined it with a magnifying glass, noting its depth and angle. It was not a random mark, but a calculated one, as if someone had tested a tool against the wood. He checked the latch again, confirming it was secure. Then he stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. The bookshelves caught his attention. One section, near the window, seemed slightly misaligned, the books not quite flush with the edge. He approached, running his fingers along the shelf. A faint click sounded, and a panel swung open, revealing a narrow space behind the wall. It was not a passage, but a compartment, empty save for a single object, a small, sharp tool, its blade gleaming faintly. Poirot's heart quickened, a glass gutter, abandoned in haste. The thief had planned to use it, perhaps, but had not. Why? Had they been interrupted? Or had they found another way? He pocketed the tool, his mind racing. The compartment was a clue, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who had access to this hidden space, and why leave the tool behind? He stepped outside, circling the manor to examine the study's exterior window. The moors stretched endlessly before him, their mist curling like ghostly fingers. The window was high, its frame weathered but intact. He studied the ground below, finding no footprints, no signs of a ladder. But there, on the sill, was another faint mark, a smudge, as if someone had rested a hand or a tool there. Poirot returned to the study, his confidence growing. The scratch, the tool, the smudge, they were threads in a tapestry, and he was beginning to see the pattern. He summoned Eleanor and the guests, determined to press them further. As they gathered, he held up the glass gutter, his voice calm, but piercing. Ms. Amos, he said, this was found in a hidden compartment in this very room. A tool for cutting glass, yet the window remains intact. Curious, non. I wonder which of you can explain its presence. Victor's face paled, Clara's hands twitched. Hargrove snorted, dismissing the find. Penelope's eyes widened, her notebook slipping from her grasp. Poirot watched them all, his mind cataloging their reactions. The thief was among them, and they were growing careless. The locked room was no longer a mystery but a challenge he was ready to conquer. The day unfolded with more questions, more clues. Poirot interviewed the gardener, who confirmed seeing a figure in a dark coat, Victor's coat, perhaps, but the light had been poor. He questioned Clara about the manor's history, learning of her long service and her knowledge of its quirks. Hargrove's bluster revealed little, but his insistence on his alibi seemed forceful. Penelope's sketches, when Poirot requested to see them, included detailed drawings of the manor's windows, including the study's. By evening, Poirot was satisfied. The scratch was not a mistake, but a deliberate act, a clue to the thief's method. The glass gutter suggested an aborted plan, perhaps abandoned when a simpler method was found. The hidden compartment hinted at someone with intimate knowledge of the manor. Clara, perhaps, or even Eleanor herself. But Poirot's instincts told him the truth lay elsewhere, in the interplay of motives and opportunities. As night fell, he stood alone in the study, the chandelier casting flickering shadows. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work. The star of Anubis was close, he could feel it. The locked room was no longer a barrier but a map, and the scratch was its starting point. He smiled, his confidence unshaken. The thief had made a mistake, and Hercule Poirot would ensure it was their last. Chapter 3. Shadows of Motivate. Morning after the tense dinner at Ashbourne Manor, the Yorkshire moors were cloaked in a thick, rolling mist that seemed to seep into the very walls of the grand old house. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood by the tall windows of the drawing-room, his sharp eyes scanning the gray expanse outside. The fog, he mused, was a fitting metaphor for the mystery at hand, obscuring, elusive, yet not impenetrable to a mind trained in precision and order. The theft of the Star of Anubis, a priceless Egyptian artifact, from Lady Eleanor Ashbourne's locked study demanded his full attention, and he was determined to unravel the threads of motive that bound the manor's inhabitants. Poirot turned from the window, his small, polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor as he made his way to the breakfast room. The air was heavy with the scent of toast and coffee, but the atmosphere among the guests was anything but warm. Lady Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her silver hair neatly pinned, her expression composed yet strained. To her right, her nephew Victor slouched in his chair, his dark eyes darting nervously as he toyed with a piece of bacon. Across from him, Mr. Hargrove, the brash American businessman, spread butter on his toast with aggressive swipes, his loud voice recounting a deal he'd closed in Chicago. Dr. Penelope Wren, the archaeologist, sat quietly at the far end, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, her face pale and drawn. Clara, the maid, moved silently around the table, refilling cups with a practiced grace that belied the tension in her posture. Poirot took his seat, accepting a cup of tea from Clara. With a polite nod, "Merci, mademoiselle," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone that made Clara pause for a fraction of a second before continuing her duties. He observed the group, his little gray cells already at work, the locked study, the faint scratch on the window frame, the alibis that did not quite align. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, but the motives, the motives were the key. He needed to understand what drove each person in this room, what desires or fears might have led them to steal the star. Lady Eleanor, Poirot began, his tone light but deliberate. "Perhaps you might indulge Hercule Poirot with a little history of your guess. It is, how you say, a matter of curiosity for one who seeks to understand the dynamics of such a gathering." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Ever the detective, Monsieur Poirot. Very well, I suppose it's only fair to give you the lay of the land." She set down her teacup and leaned back, her gaze sweeping over the table. "Victor, my nephew, has been with me since his parents passed. He's a dear boy, though prone to extravagance. He stands to inherit Ashbourne Manor, should I ever decide to part with it." Victor's fork clattered against his plate, and he shot his aunt a look that was equal parts irritation and embarrassment. "Really, Aunt Eleanor, must we air family matters over breakfast?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Mais non, monsieur Victor, it is precisely over breakfast that one learns the most. Pray, continue, Lady Eleanor." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with amusement, but she pressed on. "Mr. Hargrove, our American friend, is a businessman of some repute, here to discuss potential investments in my late husband's collection of antiquities. He has a keen interest in the Star of Anubis, I believe." Hargrove let out a booming laugh, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Guilty as charged, Lady Eleanor. That artifact's a beaut worth a fortune on the right market. Not that I'd ever dream of anything untoward. Mind you," his grin was wide, but Poirot noted the way his eyes flicked toward the others, as if gauging their reactions. And Dr. Wren, Eleanor continued, is a scholar of ancient Egypt, invited to study the star for her upcoming book. Her work is quite remarkable, or so I'm told. Penelope's cheeks flushed, and she offered a shy smile. You're too kind, Lady Eleanor. The star was, a cornerstone of my research. Its loss is a blow, professionally and personally. Poirot's gaze lingered on Penelope for a moment before shifting to Clara, who was clearing plates with a quiet efficiency. And Mademoiselle Clara, she is, I presume, a trusted member of your household. Eleanor nodded. Clara has been with me for 5 years. She's indispensable, loyal, discreet, and far more capable than she lets on. Clara's hands faltered briefly as she stacked a plate, and Poirot's sharp eyes caught the movement. Loyal, perhaps, but not without her secrets, he thought. He sipped his tea, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the room feel a touch more uncomfortable. Merci, Lady Eleanor, he said at last. It is most helpful to understand the players in this little drama. Now, if I may, I would like to speak with each of you privately this morning. The star of Anubis, it does not vanish of its own accord. Nong. There is a human hand at work, and Hercule Poirot will find it. The room fell silent, the clink of cutlery and the rustle of napkins suddenly conspicuous. Victor pushed his chair back abruptly, muttering something about needing air. Hargrove's grin faded, replaced by a calculating look. Penelope stared at her teacup as if it held the answers to the universe, while Clara slipped out of the room, her expression unreadable. Poirot began his interviews in the library, a grand room lined with oak shelves and heavy with the scent of old leather. He chose this setting deliberately. It was neutral ground, yet its imposing atmosphere might loosen tongues. He sat behind a mahogany desk, his notebook open, his pencil poised, as he invited Victor to join him first. Victor entered with a scowl, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored jacket. This is absurd, Poirot, he said without preamble. I'm not some criminal to be interrogated. I was nowhere near the study when the star was taken. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with polite skepticism. Monsieur Victor, it is not the accusation that brings us here, but the clarification. You were seen near the study, were you not? By the gardener, perhaps, or another servant. Victor's face reddened. That's nonsense. I was in my room, reading. Ask anyone. Reading, you say. Poirot's tone was mild, but his gaze was unrelenting. And yet, the gardener, he is most certain he saw a figure matching your description near the study window at dusk. A curious coincidence. Nong. Victor's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his voice low. Look, Poirot, I don't know what you're fishing for, but I had no reason to steal the star. It's part of my inheritance. For God's sake, why would I risk that? Poirot made a small note in his book, his expression unreadable. Inheritance, Monsieur Victor, is a powerful motive, especially when one's debts are. Pressing. I have heard whispers, you see, of certain financial difficulties, a gambling debt, perhaps, or an unwise investment. Victor's eyes widened, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might bolt from the room. Instead, he slumped back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. Fine, he muttered. I owe a bit of money. Nothing serious, but stealing the star, that's madness. It's not like I could sell it without drawing attention. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, though his mind was already cataloguing the young man's defensiveness. Merci, Monsieur Victor. You may go, but do reflect, if you please, on the importance of precision in one's recollections. Victor stormed out, leaving Poirot to contemplate the first thread of motive. Debt was a powerful driver, and Victor's inheritance made the star a tantalizing target. But was he cunning enough to execute a theft from a locked room? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Clara, who entered the library with a tray of tea, her movements precise, but her eyes guarded. Mademoiselle Clara, Poirot said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Please, sit. I would have a word about your duties in the manor. Clara hesitated, then set the tray down and took the seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I don't know what I can tell you, sir, she said, her voice soft but steady. I was cleaning the east wing when the star was taken. I didn't see anything unusual. Poirot's mustache twitched as he leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. Cleaning, oui, but you are close to Lady Eleanor. Are you not? You know her habits, her secrets. Perhaps you know, too, of the star's value not just in money, but in power over others. Clara's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Poirot saw a flash of something fear, perhaps, or resentment. I'm loyal to Lady Eleanor, she said firmly. I'd never betray her trust. Loyalty is a fine thing, Poirot replied, but even the loyal have their burdens. A debt, perhaps, or a past that weighs heavily. I have seen many such burdens in my time, mademoiselle, and they often lead to desperate acts. Clara's hands tightened in her lap, and Poirot noticed a faint tremor. I don't know what you mean, sir, she said, but her voice was less certain now. I'm just a maid. I don't have anything to do with artifacts or theft. Poirot made another note, his pencil scratching softly against the paper. Merci, mademoiselle. You may return to your duties. But know that Hercule Poirot sees much, even in the smallest gestures. As Clara left, Poirot leaned back, his mind turning over her reaction. There was something there, a crack in her composure that suggested more than simple loyalty. He would need to watch her closely, perhaps even follow her movements in the manor. Next came Mr. Hargrove, who strode into the library with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. He dropped into the chair without invitation, crossing his legs and flashing a grin that was more challenge than charm. Well, Poirot, he said, you've got me curious. What's the game? You think I swiped that shiny bauble? I'm a businessman, not a cat burglar. Poirot's smile was polite but cold. Monsieur Hargrove, a businessman is often the most dangerous of thieves, for he steals with a smile and a contract. You have expressed great interest in the Star of Anubis. Nong. Perhaps you saw an opportunity to acquire it for one of your deals. Hargrove laughed, a loud, brash sound that echoed in the quiet library. You've got a sharp tongue, Poirot. I'll give you that. Sure, I wanted the star, who wouldn't? It's a gold mine, but steal it? Nah, that's not my style. I'd rather buy it fair and square, or at least negotiate a finder's fee. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, monsieur, you were in the library at the time of the theft, a room that is, I believe, quite close to the study, a convenient place to wait, perhaps, for the right moment. Hargrove's grin faltered, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping. Look, Poirot, I don't like where this is going. I was in the library, sure, but I was reading up on Egyptian artifacts. Research, you know. I didn't hear a thing, didn't see a thing. You're barking up the wrong tree. Poirot made a note, his expression unreadable. Research, you say, most interesting. And what, pray, did you learn about the star that made it so valuable to you? Hargrove hesitated, then shrugged. It's rare, old, and tied to some big names in the antiquities market. I know a guy in New York who'd pay through the nose for it. But that's just business, Poirot. Nothing shady about it. Poirot nodded, dismissing Hargrove with a wave of his hand. Merci, monsieur. You have given me much to consider. As Hargrove left, Poirot tapped his pencil against his notebook. The American's bravado was a shield, but for what? A shady deal, as he suspected, or something more personal. The star's value on the black market was undeniable, and Hargrove's connections made him a plausible suspect. Dr. Penelope Wren was the last to enter, her steps hesitant, her eyes avoiding Poirot's as she took her seat. She clutched a small notebook, its pages filled with sketches and notes, and Poirot noted the way her fingers tightened around it, as if it were a lifeline. Mademoiselle Wren, he began, his voice soft but firm, you are a scholar, a woman of intellect. The star of Anubis, it is more than a trinket to you, is it not? It is the key to your research, your reputation, perhaps even your future. Penelope nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. It's true, Monsieur Poirot, the star is unique. Its inscriptions could rewrite what we know about Anubis worship in the New Kingdom. Without it, my book, my career could be in jeopardy. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. And so, mademoiselle, one might wonder if desperation drove you to take the star, to study it in secret, perhaps to keep it from others who might claim it. Penelope's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. No, I would never steal it. I was in the garden, sketching, when it happened. I swear it. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. The garden, oui, but it is a large garden, and the study's window is not so far away. A quick visit, perhaps, to check on the artifact, a moment of temptation. Penelope's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her notebook. I did go near the study earlier that day, to ask Lady Eleanor if I could examine the star again. But she said it was locked away, and I left. I didn't go back. Poirot made a final note, his expression thoughtful. Merci, Mademoiselle Wren. Your passion for your work is clear, but passion, it can lead to rash decisions. I will consider this carefully. As Penelope left, Poirot closed his notebook and stood, stretching his arms. The interviews had been illuminating, but they had also deepened the mystery. Each guest had a motive: Victor's debts, Clara's hidden resentment, Hargrove's greed, Penelope's desperation, but none had yet revealed the full truth. He needed more, something tangible to connect the dots. That afternoon, Poirot took a walk through the manor's gardens, his mind turning over the morning's conversations. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing the stark beauty of the moors, but Poirot's attention was drawn to the study's window, visible from the path. The faint scratch he'd noticed the previous day was still there, a deliberate mark, he was certain, but its purpose eluded him. He crouched to examine it again. Running his finger along the frame, it was too precise for a random scratch, too shallow to suggest a forced entry. A tool, perhaps, or a signal. As he straightened, he heard raised voices from the terrace. Victor and Hargrove were arguing, their words carrying on the wind. Poirot moved closer, staying out of sight behind a hedge. You think you can waltz in here and take what's mine? Victor snapped, his voice sharp with anger. The star belongs to this family, Hargrove, not some Yankee profiteer. Hargrove's laugh was mocking. Yours, you're drowning in debt, kid. You'd sell your own aunt if it got you out of the hole. Don't lecture me about family. Victor's face was red with fury, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might strike Hargrove. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed back into the manor, leaving Hargrove chuckling to himself. Poirot emerged from the hedge, brushing a leaf from his coat. A most interesting exchange, Monsieur Hargrove, he said, his voice calm but carrying a hint of steel. Old grudges, perhaps. Hargrove started, then recovered his grin. Just a friendly spat, Poirot. Kid's got a chip on his shoulder. That's all. Poirot nodded, but his eyes were sharp. Grudges, monsieur, have a way of turning into actions. I suggest you tread carefully. As Hargrove muttered something and walked away, Poirot's attention was drawn to Clara, who was sweeping the terrace nearby. She had paused, her broom still, her eyes fixed on the spot where Victor and Hargrove had stood. Poirot approached her, his steps deliberate. Mademoiselle Clara, he said, you have the air of one who has seen something of importance. Perhaps you would share it with Hercule Poirot. Clara's eyes darted to his, and for a moment, he thought she might speak. Instead, she shook her head and resumed sweeping, her movements brisk. Nothing, sir. Just doing my work. But as she turned away, A small piece of paper slipped from her apron pocket and fluttered to the ground. Poirot bent to retrieve it, his movements swift and discreet. It was a note, written in a hurried hand. Debts repaid. Meet at midnight. Poirot tucked the note into his pocket, his mind racing. A meeting at midnight, with whom? And for what purpose? Clara's loyalty, it seemed, was not as simple as it appeared. He resolved to watch her closely, to follow her movements that night. The little gray cells were humming now, piecing together the fragments of motive and opportunity. As evening fell, the manor settled into an uneasy calm. Poirot joined the guests for dinner, his presence a quiet but constant reminder of the investigation. The conversation was stilted, with Eleanor attempting to steer it toward neutral topics: art, literature, the weather, but the undercurrent of suspicion was palpable. Victor barely spoke, his eyes fixed on his plate. Hargrove dominated the conversation with stories of his business ventures, though his joviality felt forced. Penelope excused herself early, claiming a headache, and Clara moved silently around the table, her face a mask of neutrality. After dinner, Poirot retired to his room, but he did not intend to sleep. He sat by the window, the note in his hand, waiting for the clock to strike midnight. The manor was silent, save for the occasional creak of old wood and the distant howl of the wind across the moors. At 11:30, he slipped into the hallway, his steps muffled by the thick carpet. He positioned himself near the servants' stairs, where he could see the corridor leading to Clara's room. At precisely midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. Clara, dressed in a dark shawl, moving with purpose toward the east wing. Poirot followed at a distance, his heart beating steadily despite the thrill of the chase. She descended a narrow staircase, one he had not noticed before, and entered a small room tucked behind the kitchen. Poirot waited a moment, then eased the door open, just enough to hear. Inside, Clara was speaking in a low, urgent voice. "I did what you asked," she said. "The note was delivered, but this is the last time. I won't be your pawn any more," a man's voice replied, too low for Poirot to identify, but the tone was sharp, commanding. "You'll do as you're told, or everyone will know what you did." The stars, just the beginning. Poirot's mind raced. Blackmail? Then, Clara was caught in a web, but whose? He retreated silently, knowing he could not confront her now without risking the larger truth. As he returned to his room, he felt a surge of satisfaction. The note, the argument, the midnight meeting, the pieces were falling into place. Clara was a key, but not the thief, he suspected. Someone else was pulling the strings, and Poirot was determined to find them. He sat at his desk, his notebook open, and began to sketch a timeline of the night the star vanished, cross-referencing the alibis and motives. Victor's debts, Hargrove's greed, Penelope's desperation. Clara's secret. Each was a shadow of motive, but the true culprit remained just out of reach. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work, confident that the truth was near. The chapter closed with Poirot staring into the darkness, the note tucked safely in his pocket, his resolve unshaken. The star of Anubis would not remain hidden for long, not from Hercule Poirot. Chapter 4. The midnight intraderth moon hung low over Ashbourne Manor, its pale light filtering through the heavy drapes of Hercule Poirot's guest room. The hour was late, well past midnight, and the house had settled into an uneasy silence. After the day's revelations, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, mingling with the faint musk of the Yorkshire moors that seeped through the slightly ajar window. Poirot, ever a creature of habit, had retired early, his mind a whirl of deductions and suspicions, but sleep eluded him. His little gray cells, as he liked to call them, were restless, piecing together the puzzle of the missing star of Anubis. He lay in the four-poster bed, his eyes tracing the intricate carvings on the canopy above, when a faint sound broke the stillness. A soft creak, not unlike the groan of an ancient floorboard under cautious weight. Poirot's senses sharpened. He sat up, his small frame taut with alertness, and listened. There it was again, a muffled shuffle, deliberate and stealthy, emanating from the corridor beyond his door. Someone was moving through the manor, and, at this hour, such movement could only mean mischief. Poirot slipped from the bed with the grace of a cat, his silk pajamas whispering softly as he donned a dressing gown and retrieved his pocket torch. His movements were precise, economical, betraying none of the urgency that pulsed through his mind. He opened the door a crack, peering into the darkened hallway. The manor's corridors were a labyrinth of oak-paneled walls and faded tapestries, their shadows dancing in the flickering light of a single sconce left burning at the far end. The sound came again, closer now, from the direction of the grand staircase. He stepped into the hall, his polished shoes silent on the thick runner, and followed the noise. The manor seemed to breathe around him, its creaks and groans a chorus of secrets. Poirot's torch cast a narrow beam, illuminating portraits of stern-faced Ashburns glaring down from their gilded frames. He paused at a corner, where the corridor split toward the guest wing and the main staircase. A shadow moved, a fleeting silhouette against the wall, too quick to identify, but unmistakably human. Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained impassive. He adjusted his mustache, a reflexive gesture, and crept forward. The shadow had vanished down a side passage leading to the east wing, where the guest rooms were located. He followed, his torch sweeping the floor to avoid betraying his presence. With light, the passage narrowed, lined with heavy oak doors, each leading to a room occupied by one of Lady Eleanor's eclectic guests. Victor's room was nearest, then Clara's, followed by Mr. Hargrove's, and finally Dr. Penelope Wren's at the far end. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint click, as if a door had been carefully closed. Poirot paused outside Penelope's room, his ear pressed to the wood. Silence. He tested the handle locked. He considered knocking but dismissed the idea. A midnight confrontation would yield little truth from a startled suspect. Instead, he moved to the next door, Hargrove's, and listened again. Nothing. The manor had swallowed the intruder, or they were adept at concealment. He was about to return to his room when a soft thud echoed from Penelope's direction. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He approached her door again, this time noticing a faint sliver of light beneath it. Someone was awake, and they were not merely reading by candlelight. He knocked softly, 3 precise taps, and waited. The light vanished, and after a moment, the door creaked open to reveal Dr. Penelope Wren, her auburn hair disheveled, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, her voice a hushed whisper, "what are you doing here at this hour?" Poirot inclined his head, his torch now off, his expression one of polite curiosity. "Mademoiselle Wren, it is I who should ask you that question. I heard a noise, you see, and I am not one to ignore such things in a house where a priceless artifact has vanished." Penelope's cheeks flushed, though whether from guilt or embarrassment, Poirot could not yet discern. She wore a simple nightgown, her hands clutching a shawl tightly around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she stammered. "I was looking for my sketchbook. I must have dropped it somewhere in the house." "A sketchbook," at this. Our Poirot's tone was gentle, but laced with skepticism. "Surely, mademoiselle, your sketches of the manor's architecture could wait until morning." Her eyes darted to the side, a telltale sign of unease. "It's important to my work," she insisted. "I thought I might have left it in the library or the drawing-room." Poirot studied her, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "And did you find it? This sketchbook of such urgency?" "No," she admitted, her shoulders slumping. "I was just about to give up." "Very well," Poirot said, stepping back. "Then I suggest you return to your rest. The manor is not a place for wandering at night, especially with a thief among us." Penelope nodded, her expression unreadable, and closed the door. Poirot waited, his ears straining for any further sound, but the hall remained silent. He did not believe her story, not entirely. The sketchbook excuse was flimsy, and her nervous demeanor suggested she was hiding something. He resolved to investigate her room at the earliest opportunity, but for now, he needed more information, The next morning, Poirot rose early, his mind still turning over the night's events. Breakfast was a subdued affair, with the guests exchanging guarded glances over plates of kedgeree and toast. Lady Eleanor, ever the gracious hostess, attempted to lighten the mood with talk of the moor's beauty, but the tension was palpable. Victor slouched in his chair, picking at his food, while Clara served coffee with a quiet efficiency that bordered on invisibility. Hargrove, his usual bluster subdued, kept his eyes on his plate, and Penelope seemed distracted, her fork hovering over her untouched eggs. Poirot observed them all, his keen eyes missing nothing. He noted the way Victor's fingers twitched when Eleanor mentioned the Star of Anubis, the slight tremor in Clara's hand as she poured coffee, and the way Hargrove's gaze flicked toward Penelope when she spoke. There was a web of secrets here, and Poirot was determined to untangle it. After breakfast, he requested permission from Lady Eleanor to inspect the guest rooms, citing the need to ensure no clues had been overlooked. Eleanor, trusting his discretion, agreed, though she warned him to tread carefully to avoid offending her guests. Poirot assured her he would be the soul of tact. He began with Penelope's room, knocking politely and finding it empty. She had mentioned a plan to sketch the manor's gardens that morning. The room was tidy, with a small desk cluttered with pencils, papers, and archaeological texts. A worn leather satchel sat in the corner, its straps frayed from use. Poirot's attention was drawn to the desk, where a stack of sketches depicted the manor's facade, its towers, and its intricate stonework. The drawings were meticulous, almost obsessively so, with measurements and annotations in a precise hand. He moved to the wardrobe, checking for anything out of place. Behind a pile of folded sweaters, he found a small wooden box, its lid carved. With an Egyptian motif, his pulse quickened. He opened it carefully, revealing a folded piece of parchment. It was not a sketchbook, but a map, a detailed diagram of Ashbourne Manor, with lines crisscrossing the layout, marking what appeared to be secret passages. One passage led from the east wing to the study where the star had been kept. Poirot's lips curved into a small smile. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the good doctor is not so innocent as she seems." He tucked the map into his pocket and continued his search, finding nothing else of note. The discovery of the map was a breakthrough, but it raised more questions. Why did Penelope have such a map? Was she planning to steal the star? Or had she stumbled upon the passages while researching the manor's history? Her story about the sketchbook was clearly a fabrication, but to what end? That afternoon, Poirot found Penelope in the garden, her easel set up near a crumbling stone fountain. She was sketching the manor's east wing, her pencil moving with quick, practiced strokes. She started when she saw him, nearly dropping her pencil. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, forcing a smile. "You startled me." "Forgive me, mademoiselle," he said, his tone smooth. "I wish to discuss your nocturnal wanderings." Her smile faltered. "I told you I was looking for my sketchbook." "Indeed," Poirot said, producing the map from his pocket. "And yet, I found this in your room, a most curious sketchbook. Non. One that maps the hidden passages of Ashbourne Manor." Penelope's face paled, and for a moment, she seemed on the verge of flight. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I suppose there's no point in denying it," she said. "Yes. I found the map in an old book in the library. It's part of my research. The manor has a history of secret passages, built centuries ago to hide priests during the Reformation. I thought they might lead to the star." "And did they?" Poirot asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I didn't steal it, Monsieur Poirot. I swear, I was only trying to find it. My career depends on studying that artifact. Without it, my research is worthless." Poirot tilted his head, considering her words. Her desperation was genuine, but her story still felt incomplete. "You will forgive me, mademoiselle, if I reserve judgment. The passages are a significant discovery, and I must explore them myself." Penelope nodded, her eyes downcast, Do what you must. I only want to clear my name." Poirot left her to her sketching, his mind racing. The passages changed everything. If the thief had used them, the locked room was no longer a mystery. The star could have been taken without ever touching the study's door or window. But who else knew of the passages? Clara, with her intimate knowledge of the manor. Victor, as Eleanor's heir, or Hargrove, with his resources and cunning. That evening, Poirot enlisted the gardener, a gruff but loyal man named Thomas, to help him locate the passage entrances. Thomas, who had worked at the manor for decades, confirmed that the passages existed but were rarely used, their entrances hidden behind panels and false walls. Armed with the map, Poirot and Thomas began their search, starting in the east wing. They found the first entrance behind a tapestry in the corridor near Penelope's room, a cleverly concealed panel that slid open with a soft click. The passage was narrow, its stone walls damp and mossy. Lit only by Poirot's torch, it wound through the manor's heart, branching off toward the study, the library, and even the attic. Poirot's mind buzzed with possibilities. The thief could have moved unseen, slipping into the study to take the star and vanishing before anyone noticed. As they explored, Poirot noticed faint scuff marks on the passage floor. Recent. By the look of them, someone had been here, and not long ago. He followed the marks to a junction where the passage split, one path leading to the study, another upward to the attic. He chose the study path, emerging behind a bookcase that swung outward into Eleanor's locked room. The mechanism was ingenious, requiring only a gentle push to open. Poirot stepped into the study, his torch illuminating the familiar scene, the heavy desk, the empty display case where the star had rested, the scratched window frame he had noted earlier. He examined the bookcase, finding no signs of forced entry. The passage was the key. The scratch on the window, he now realized, was likely a red herring planted to mislead him. The thief was clever, but Poirot was cleverer. He returned to the passage, following the upward path to the attic. It emerged behind a stack of crates, the air thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. Here, too, were signs of recent passage disturbed. Dust, a faint footprint in the grime. Poirot's torch swept the attic, revealing trunks, old furniture, and a small table where a single item caught his eye, a folded cloth, stained with what looked like wax. He lifted it carefully, revealing a faint impression of an ink, the symbol of the Star of Anubis. His heart quickened. The thief had been here, perhaps hiding the artifact before moving it elsewhere. But why leave such a clue? Was it carelessness, or another deliberate misdirection? Poirot pocketed the cloth and returned to the main house, his mind a storm of deductions. The passages confirmed that the theft was an inside job, planned with intimate knowledge of the manor's secrets. Penelope's map made her a prime suspect, but her desperation suggested she was not the mastermind. Clara, with her access to every corner of the house, was a possibility, as was Victor, who stood to gain the most from Eleanor's wealth. Hargrove's motives were murkier, tied to his shady dealings, but his confidence suggested he knew more than he let on. As Poirot descended the grand staircase, the manor seemed to close in around him, its shadows deeper, its secrets heavier. He paused at the landing, his hand resting on the banister, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The discovery of the passages was a critical piece of the puzzle, and he was closer to the truth than ever. The thief, whoever they were, had underestimated Hercule Poirot. He retired to his room, locking the door behind him, and spread the map on his desk. With a pencil, he traced the passages, marking their entrances and exits, noting their proximity to the study and the attic. The cloth with the ink impression lay beside it, a tangible link to the star. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes half closed. The little gray cells were at work, and they would not rest until the mystery was solved. The next day promised more revelations, but for now, Poirot was content. He had uncovered a vital clue, and the game was afoot. The manor's secrets were no match for his intellect, and the thief, he knew, was running out of places to hide. Chapter 5. The alibi unravels. Morning after Poirot's discovery of the manor's secret passages, Ashbourne Manor buzzed with an uneasy energy. The Yorkshire moors outside were cloaked in a heavy mist, as if the very landscape conspired to keep the secrets of the house hidden. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, each guest casting sidelong glances at the others over breakfast. The clink of porcelain and the soft scrape of silverware were the only sounds breaking the tense silence, for no one dared speak openly about the missing star of Anubis. Hercule Poirot, seated at the head of the table at Lady Eleanor Ashbourne's insistence, sipped his coffee with deliberate calm, his sharp eyes scanning the room. His mustache twitched slightly, a telltale sign that his little gray cells were already at work. Eleanor, dressed in a somber gray gown that matched the mood of the morning, broke the silence first. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency, "have you made any progress in your investigation? The star's absence weighs heavily on us all." Her eyes flickered briefly toward her nephew, Victor, whose sullen expression did little to mask his discomfort. Poirot set down his cup with a delicate clink, his movements precise. "Madame, the truth is like a fine tapestry, complex, with many threads that must be carefully unraveled. I have begun to pull at these threads, and soon the pattern will reveal itself. For now, I propose a small experiment." His gaze swept the table, lingering on each guest. Victor slouched in his chair, his fingers drumming nervously. Clara, the maid, who stood at the edge of the room, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly. Mr. Hargrove, the American businessman, whose brash confidence seemed tempered by unease, and Dr. Penelope Wren, the archaeologist, whose eyes darted to the window as if seeking escape. "An experiment?" Hargrove asked, leaning forward, his thick eyebrows raised. "What kind of game are you playing?" Poirot: "No game, monsieur." "Hargrove," Poirot replied, his voice smooth but firm, "a reenactment. Tonight, we shall recreate the events of the evening the star of Anubis vanished. Each of you will take your place, as you were that night, and we shall see what truths emerge when the scene is set anew." The announcement was met with a chorus of reactions. Victor's scowl deepened, Clara's hands tightened, Hargrove let out a skeptical huff, and Penelope's lips parted in a faint gasp before she quickly composed herself. Eleanor, however, nodded approvingly. "An excellent idea, Monsieur Poirot. Let us put this matter to rest." The day passed in a haze of anticipation. Poirot spent the morning revisiting the locked study where the star had been kept, his magnifying glass in hand as he examined every inch of the room once more. The faint scratch on the window frame, which he had noted the previous day, remained a point of fascination. It was too precise, too deliberate to be accidental, yet it led nowhere. No glass was broken, no latch tampered with. The study's heavy oak door, locked from the inside, showed no signs of forced entry. The mystery of how the thief had entered and exited without a trace gnawed at Poirot, but he filed the detail away, confident it would connect to the larger puzzle. By late afternoon, Poirot had enlisted the manor staff to assist in preparing for the reenactment. The gardener, Mr. Thomas, a wiry man with a weathered face and a quiet demeanor, proved particularly helpful. Poirot had taken a liking to him, noting the man's keen observation skills despite his unassuming nature. "Monsieur Thomas," Poirot said as they walked the grounds, "you were tending the roses near the study on the evening of the theft, were you not?" "Eh, sir," Thomas replied, his Yorkshire accent thick. "I was clipping the hedges, till nigh on 8, then went to me shed to clean me tools." "And did you see anyone near the study window?" Poirot's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Thomas hesitated, scratching his chin. "Well, now you mention it, I did see young Master Victor pacing about near the west wing, not far from the study. Looked right agitated." "He did, but I didn't think much of it at the time." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Agitated, you say? Most interesting." And at what hour was this? Must have been just before 8. Sir. The light was fading, but I'm sure it was him. Merci, Monsieur Thomas, Poirot said, clapping the gardener on the shoulder. You have been most helpful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manor stone facade, the guests gathered in the drawing-room to begin the reenactment. Poirot stood at the center, his small frame commanding the room's attention. Mesdames, et messieurs, he began, we shall now retrace your movements from the evening of the theft. You will each go to where you claim to have been between 7 and 9 o'clock, when Lady Eleanor discovered the star missing. I, Hercule Poirot, will observe, and perhaps the truth will reveal itself. Victor crossed his arms, his jaw tight. This is ridiculous. You're treating us like criminals. Not criminals, Monsieur Victor, Poirot replied smoothly. Merely actors in a play we must perform to uncover the truth. Now, if you please, you were where at 7 o'clock? Victor sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. I was in my room, reading. I told you that. And you, Mademoiselle Clara. Poirot turned to the maid, who stood near the doorway, her eyes downcast. I was cleaning the silver in the pantry. Sir, Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Monsieur Hargrove. Poirot's gaze shifted to the American, who was leaning against the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, in the library, looking over some business papers. Hargrove said gruffly, like I said before. And you, Dr. Wren. Poirot's eyes locked onto Penelope, who fidgeted with the hem of her skirt. I was in the garden, sketching the statues, Penelope said, her voice steady, but her eyes avoiding Poirot's. Very well, Poirot said, clapping his hands. To your places, if you please. I shall follow and observe. The group dispersed, each moving to their claimed locations. Poirot, accompanied by Thomas the gardener, began his rounds. First, he visited Victor's room on the second floor. The young man was seated at his desk, a book open before him, but his posture was stiff, his eyes darting to Poirot as he entered. You see, Poirot, Victor said, his tone defensive. Just as I said. Reading. Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The window was slightly ajar, letting in a cool breeze. And you did not leave this room at all between 7 and 8? Not once. Victor snapped. Poirot said nothing, merely nodding again before moving on to the pantry, where Clara was polishing a silver candlestick with excessive vigor. Mademoiselle Clara, Poirot said gently, you are most diligent in your work, but tell me, did you hear anything unusual that evening? A sound from the study, perhaps. Clara's hands paused, and she shook her head quickly. No, sir. Nothing but the usual creaks of the house. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, but he smiled. Merci, mademoiselle. As he turned to leave, he noticed a small pile of rags in the corner of the pantry, one of which bore a faint stain that looked suspiciously like polish, yet it was not silver polish, but something darker, almost like oil. He filed the observation away and continued to the library. Hargrove was sprawled in an armchair, a stack of papers on the table beside him. Well, Poirot, he said, his tone mocking. Find anything yet? Patience, Monsieur Hargrove, Poirot replied. The truth is not a thing to be rushed. His eyes fell on Hargrove's pocket watch, which lay open on the table. The hands pointed to 6:45, though the current time was well past 8. Your watch, monsieur, it is not. Correct. Hargrove glanced at it and shrugged. It's been acting up, keep stopping. I haven't had time to get it fixed. Curious, Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing his mustache. A businessman such as yourself, with a watch that does not keep time. Most curious. Finally, Poirot made his way to the garden, where Penelope sat on a stone bench, her sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of a marble statue. The fading light cast long shadows across the lawn, and Poirot noted the proximity of the garden to the study's window just a short walk across the gravel path. Your sketches are most impressive, Dr. Wren, Poirot said, peering over her shoulder. But tell me, did you see anyone near the study while you were here? Penelope's pencil paused, and she looked up, her eyes wide. No, Monsieur Poirot, I was focused on my work, of course, Poirot said, his tone neutral. He glanced toward the study window, noting the faint scratch on the frame visible even from this distance. Most focused, I am sure. As the reenactment concluded, the guests reconvened in the drawing room, their faces a mix of frustration and unease. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back. Mesdames et messieurs, the reenactment has been most illuminating. There are inconsistencies in your accounts that must be addressed. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. What inconsistencies? I was in my room, just like I said. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Monsieur Victor, you claim to have been in your room, yet Monsieur Thomas, our esteemed gardener, saw you near the study window just before 8 o'clock. How do you explain this? Victor's face flushed. He's mistaken. It was dark, and he's half blind anyway. Thomas, standing quietly at the back of the room, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Poirot turned to Clara. And you, mademoiselle, were in the pantry? Yes. Yet I found a rag with a stain that suggests you may have been handling something other than silver. Perhaps something used to tamper with a window. Clara's eyes widened, and she took a step back. I don't know what you mean. Sir, I was cleaning, that's all. And you, Monsieur Hargrove, Poirot continued, his voice growing sharper. Your watch is set to the wrong time. A convenient error, perhaps, to obscure your movements that evening. Hargrove's jaw tightened. I told you, it's broken. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. But the straws, they form a pattern, and Hercule Poirot does not ignore patterns. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group. Eleanor, seated in her armchair, looked from one guest to another, her expression unreadable. Monsieur Poirot, she said at last, do you believe one of us is the thief? Poirot smiled faintly. Madame, I believe the truth is close, so close I can almost touch it. But we must be patient. The star of Anubis has not left this manor, of that I am certain, and tonight we have taken a great step toward finding it. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their trust in one another fraying like a worn rope. Victor stormed out of the room, muttering under his breath, while Clara slipped away quietly, her face pale. Hargrove poured himself another drink, his hands trembling slightly, and Penelope clutched her sketchbook to her chest, her eyes fixed on the floor. As the group dispersed, Eleanor approached Poirot, her voice low. Monsieur Poirot, you stirred the waters tonight. Are you truly close to the truth? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Madame, the waters must be stirred to see what lies beneath. Rest assured, Hercule Poirot is on the scent, and the truth will not elude me for long. Eleanor nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. I trust you, monsieur. Good night. As the manor settled into an uneasy quiet, Poirot retired to his room, his mind racing. The reenactment had confirmed his suspicions. Victor's presence near the study, Clara's questionable rag, Hargrove's faulty watch, and Penelope's proximity to the crime scene all pointed to a web of deception. But the scratch on the window frame remained the key clue that tied the physical act of the theft to the human motives behind it. He sat at the small writing desk in his room, pulling out a notebook to jot down his observations. The scratch, he noted, was not deep enough to suggest a tool had been used to force the window open, but its precision suggested intent. Could it have been a distraction, meant to draw attention to the window while the true method of entry lay elsewhere? The secret passages Penelope had mapped were a possibility, but they did not explain the locked door. And then there was Hargrove's watch, broken, or deliberately set to mislead. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. The alibis were unraveling, but the truth was still obscured. like a figure in the Yorkshire mist. He thought of Clara's nervous demeanor, Victor's agitation, Hargrove's defensiveness, and Penelope's secrecy. Each had a motive, each had opportunity, but only one had the cunning to execute the theft without leaving a trace. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot closed his notebook and stood, his resolve firm. The Star of Anubis, he murmured to himself, it is not merely a jewel, but a mirror that reflects the greed and fear of those who covet it. Tomorrow, Hercule Poirot shall hold that mirror up to the light. He extinguished the lamp and retired to bed, the manor's silence broken only by the distant howl of the wind across the moors. The case was far from solved, but Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The threads of the tapestry were coming together, and soon the pattern would be clear. The next morning, the tension in the manor was palpable. Breakfast was a strained affair, with Victor barely touching his food and Clara avoiding eye contact with everyone. Hargrove, however, seemed to have regained some of his bravado, loudly proclaiming his innocence to anyone who would listen. Penelope, meanwhile, kept to herself, her sketchbook open but her pencil idle. Poirot, ever observant, noted these shifts in behavior. He decided to press his advantage. Beginning with a private conversation with Victor, he found the young man in the billiard room, idly knocking balls across the table. Monsieur Victor, Poirot said, closing the door behind him, we must speak frankly. You were seen near the study on the night of the theft, yet you claim to have been in your room. This discrepancy, it troubles me. Victor's cue-stick paused mid-strike. I told you, Thomas is wrong. I wasn't there. But you were agitated that evening. Poirot pressed. Why? Was it your debts? Perhaps. Or something more personal? Victor's eyes flashed with anger. You've been poking into my affairs, haven't you? Fine? Yes, I owe money. But I didn't steal the star. If anything, I'd say Clara's the one to watch. She's always skulking about, listening at doors. She's not as innocent as she seems. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You accuse Mademoiselle Clara, and why is that? She's got a past, Victor said, lowering his voice. I overheard her talking to Hargrove once. Something about debts repaid. Sounded like she was hiding something. Most interesting, Poirot said, though his tone gave nothing away. And you, Monsieur Victor, have you no secrets of your own? Victor's jaw tightened, and he turned back to the billiard table. I've said enough. You want the truth. Look at Clara. Poirot left the room, his mind turning over Victor's words. The accusation against Clara was not unexpected, but it was the vehemence behind it that intrigued him. Was Victor genuinely suspicious, or was he deflecting attention from himself? Next, Poirot sought out Clara, finding her in the kitchen, kneading dough with a vigor that suggested she was taking out her frustrations on the bread. Mademoiselle Clara, he said gently, you have been most quiet since our reenactment. Is there something you wish to share with Hercule Poirot? Clara's hands stilled, and she looked up, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know what you mean. Sir, I've told you everything. The rag in the pantry, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. It bore a stain, not of silver polish, but of something else. Oil, perhaps. The kind used to lubricate a tool or a lock. Clara's face paled, and she took a step back. I swear, sir, I didn't do anything. I was cleaning, like I said, that rag. It must have been used by someone else. Someone else, Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. And who might that be? I don't know. Clara's voice rose, and she looked around as if expecting someone to overhear. Please, Monsieur Poirot, I didn't take the star. I wouldn't. Poirot studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, mademoiselle. But know this, Hercule Poirot sees all, and the truth cannot hide forever. As he left the kitchen, Poirot's thoughts turned to Hargrove's watch. The businessman's claim that it was broken seemed plausible, but the timing was too convenient. A broken watch could be a clever alibi, allowing Hargrove to claim he was elsewhere when the theft occurred. Poirot resolved to test this theory. He found Hargrove in the library, poring over a newspaper with a scowl. "Monsieur Hargrove," Poirot said, taking a seat opposite him, "your watch intrigues me. You say it is broken, yet you carry it still." Wire Hargrove looked up, his expression wary. "Sentimental value," he said gruffly. "It was my father's. I keep it even if it doesn't work." "Sentimental?" Poirot repeated, his tone skeptical. "And yet, it was set to 6:45 last night, when the theft occurred between 7 and 9. A curious coincidence." "No." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying, Poirot? That I faked my alibi? I was in this library, just like I said." "Perhaps," Poirot said, rising. "But the truth, Monsieur Hargrove, is like a shadow. It moves when the light shifts. And I intend to shift the light, the day we're on," with Poirot continuing to probe the guest's stories. He spoke to Penelope again, noting her increasing nervousness. "Dr. Wren," he said, finding her in the garden once more, "your sketches are lovely, but they do not explain why you were so close to the study on the night of the theft. Nor do they explain the map of the secret passages I found in your room." Penelope's face flushed, and she clutched her sketchbook tightly. "I told you, I was looking for my sketchbook that night. As for the map, I found it in the library. I thought it might help my research." "Your research?" Poirot said, his voice gentle but probing. "Or perhaps your desire to possess the Star of Anubis." Penelope's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. "No, I would never steal it. I only wanted to study it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "We shall see, Dr. Wren, we shall see." By evening, the manor was a powder keg of suspicion and fear. The guests gathered for dinner, their faces drawn and their conversation stilted. Poirot, seated at the head of the table once more, observed them all with a quiet intensity. He knew the truth was close, but one final piece of the puzzle was missing, a piece that would tie the scratch on the window, the secret passages, and the faulty alibis together. As the meal drew to a close, Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Monsieur Poirot, you have kept us on edge all day. Can you tell us anything to ease our minds?" Poirot stood, his small frame radiating confidence. Mesdames et messieurs, the Star of Anubis is still within these walls, and the one who took it is among us. But fear not, Hercule Poirot is close to the truth." Very close indeed. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their trust in one another all but gone. Victor pushed his plate away, his face pale. Clara's hands trembled as she cleared the table. Hargrove's eyes darted to the door, as if considering flight. And Penelope, clutching her sketchbook, looked as though she might faint. Chapter 6. The ghosts of Anubis. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly beyond Ashbourne Manor, their misty expanse cloaking the horizon in a shroud of mystery. Inside the manor, the air was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the walls, like damp. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his lap, his mustache impeccably trimmed, and his eyes, those sharp, green-gray eyes, scanning the faces of the gathered guests. The theft of the Star of Anubis, a priceless Egyptian artifact, had set the household on edge, and the tension was palpable. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, the manor's regal yet anxious matriarch, had just finished recounting a chilling tale about the artifact's history, one that sent a shiver through the room. "It is said," Eleanor began, her voice low and deliberate, "that the Star of Anubis carries a curse, forged in the sands of Egypt. It was a gift to a pharaoh's favored priestess, but its power came at a cost. Those who possessed it without reverence met untimely ends, accidents, illnesses, disappearances. My late husband, Charles, acquired it during his travels, and though he laughed at the tales, he passed not long after bringing it here." Her eyes glistened, but she held her composure, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Penelope Wren, the nervous archaeologist, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers twisting the hem of her skirt. "That's unsettling," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I've heard similar stories in my research. Whispers of a guardian spirit tied to the star. One that protects it fiercely." Victor Ashburn, Eleanor's nephew, scoffed loudly, his lean frame slouched in a chair by the fireplace. "Superstitious nonsense," he said, tossing back a glass of brandy. "It's a shiny bauble. Nothing more. People die all the time without curses." Mr. Hargrove, the American businessman with a penchant for loud suits and louder opinions, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Now, hold on, Victor. Stories like that can drive up an artifact's value. Collectors eat that kind of thing up. Curse or no curse, that star's worth a fortune." Clara, the maid, stood silently in the corner, her face unreadable as she poured tea. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, but Poirot noted the way her eyes darted toward Penelope when the archaeologist spoke of the curse. Something in her posture suggested more than mere servitude or guardedness, perhaps, or a secret. Poirot, ever the observer, tilted his head slightly, his mind already turning over the implications of Eleanor's tale. "Madame Ashburn," he said, his voice smooth and accented, "this curse you speak of it is most intriguing. But tell me, have there been incidents here at the manor since the star's arrival? Beyond the tragedy of your husband?" Eleanor hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window where the moors loomed like a dark sea. "Small things," she admitted. "Objects moved in the night, strange sounds in the halls. I thought it was the wind, or perhaps the house settling. But after the star vanished—" She trailed off, her hands trembling slightly. Penelope spoke up, her voice unsteady. I heard something the night it was stolen. Whispers, coming from the study. I was in the corridor, sketching late, and I thought it was my imagination. But," she swallowed hard, her pale cheeks flushing, "it sounded like voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand." Victor rolled his eyes. "You're jumping at shadows, Penelope. Old houses creak, that's all." Hargrove chuckled, though it lacked warmth. "Or maybe it's the ghost of Anubis, come to reclaim his prize." "You academics get spooked too easily." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room with a simple gesture. "Mademoiselle Wren, these whispers describe them, if you please. Were they distinct, as if spoken by a person nearby, or distant, like an echo?" Penelope frowned, her brow furrowing as she recalled the moment. "Distant, I think, like they were coming through the walls. I couldn't make out words, just a rhythm, almost like chanting. It stopped when I knocked on the study door." Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his expression remained placid. "Most interesting," he murmured. "And you, Madame Ashburn, have you heard such whispers?" Eleanor shook her head. "Not whispers, no. But there have been nights when I've felt, watched, as if someone, or something, was in the room with me." The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Clara set down the teapot with a faint clink, her hands steady, but her eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot noted this, too, filing it away in the meticulous cabinet of his mind. "Monsieur Hargrove, Monsieur Victor, Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot said, addressing each in turn, "have any of you experienced these phenomena, a sound, a sensation, anything unusual?" Hargrove shrugged, his broad shoulders lifting carelessly. "I sleep like a rock. If there's ghosts, they don't bother me." Victor snorted. "Nothing but the wind howling out there. This place is drafty as a barn." Clara, when prompted, shook her head. "I've heard nothing, sir," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But Poirot caught the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers curled into her apron. "Very well," Poirot said, rising from his chair with a graceful motion. "This talk of curses and whispers is most fascinating. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in ghosts. There is always a human hand behind such mysteries, and I shall find it. Madame Ashburn, with your permission, I should like to inspect the study once more. Perhaps the walls themselves will speak to me." Eleanor nodded, her relief evident. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Anything you need." The study was as Poirot had left it, a handsome room with oak-paneled walls, a heavy desk, and a single window overlooking the moors. The lock on the door was intact, the key still in Eleanor's possession. The faint scratch on the window frame, which Poirot had noted earlier, gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. He knelt beside it, his gloved fingers tracing the mark with care. It was too precise, too deliberate, to be accidental a tool, perhaps, or a blade, but it was Penelope's mention of whispers that drew his attention now. He stood, his head tilted, listening to the silence of the room. The walls were thick, the manor old, its construction a labyrinth of stone and wood. Whispers through the walls, Penelope had said. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "The walls, they do not speak," he murmured, "but they may hide." He began a methodical examination, tapping the panels with his knuckles, listening for hollow spots. The others watched from the doorway. Eleanor, Penelope, Victor, and Hargrove, with Clara hovering just behind. Their presence was a distraction, but Poirot was accustomed to working under scrutiny. His fingers paused on a panel near the fireplace, where the wood gave a slightly different sound, a dull thud, rather than the sharp rap of solid oak. "Curieux," he said softly, pressing the panel. It shifted slightly, revealing a hairline seam. With a gentle push, the panel clicked and swung inward, exposing a narrow recess. Inside, nestled against the stone, was a small device, a metal box no larger than a cigarette case, with a perforated surface. Penelope gasped. "What is that?" Poirot lifted the box carefully, turning it in his hands. "This, mademoiselle, is no artifact of Anubis. It is a speaker, a modern contrivance designed to emit sound. Someone has placed it here to create your whispers, to fuel the legend of the curse." Victor stepped forward, his face darkening. "You're saying someone's been playing tricks, staging a haunting?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "A clever trick, designed to frighten or distract, but who would benefit from such a ruse? That is the question." Hargrove crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "Sounds like a lot of trouble for a prank. What's the point?" "The point, Monsieur Hargrove, is misdirection," Poirot replied. "To make us look to the supernatural when the truth is far more earthly. The star of Anubis was not stolen by a ghost, but by a hand of flesh and blood." Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. "But who would do such a thing, and why?" Poirot set the speaker down, his mind racing. "The why is tied to the star itself, its value, its history, or perhaps its secrets. As for the who..." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the group, lingering on Clara for a fraction longer than the others. "That I shall discover." The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. Poirot dismantled the speaker, confirming it was a simple device, likely batter-powered, though the batteries had been removed. He questioned the guests further, but none admitted to knowledge of the speaker or its placement. Clara, when pressed, claimed she cleaned the study regularly but had never noticed the panel. Her answers were polite, deferential, but Poirot sensed a thread of unease beneath her calm. As evening fell, the manor seemed to grow heavier, the shadows deeper. Poirot retired to his room, a small but comfortable chamber overlooking the moors. He sat at the desk, a notebook open before him, his pen moving swiftly as he jotted down observations. The speaker was a critical clue, but it raised more questions than answers. Who had the knowledge to install such a device? Who knew the manor's secrets well enough to access the hidden recess? Clara, he thought, was the most likely candidate. As the maid, she had access to every corner of the house, and her cryptic note about debts repaid suggested a hidden agenda. But Hargrove's brash confidence and Victor's financial troubles could not be ignored. And Penelope, her story of whispers, felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to deflect suspicion. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The curse of the Star of Anubis was a fabrication, a clever ploy to mask the theft. But the theft itself remained unsolved. The locked room, the scratch on the window, the secret passages Penelope's map had revealed these were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Eleanor, her face pale in the lamplight. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, "but I've just remembered something about the star. Charles, my husband, once mentioned a hidden compartment in the study, a place he used to store important documents. I thought it irrelevant, but after the speaker, Poirot's eyes brightened. Madame, this is most helpful. Show me, if you please." They returned to the study, where Eleanor pointed to a section of the bookshelf. "He said it was behind one of the panels, but I never saw it opened." Poirot examined the shelf, his fingers probing for a latch. After a moment, he found it, a small catch disguised as a knot in the wood. The panel swung open, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, covered in Charles Ashburn's handwriting. It detailed the star's provenance, confirming its Egyptian origins, but also mentioned a guardian's mark etched into the artifact's base, a symbol that could unlock its true value. "This," Poirot said, holding the paper aloft, "is another piece of the puzzle. The thief may not have known of this compartment, but they knew enough to stage a curse. The question remains, where is the star now?" As Eleanor and Poirot discussed the find, a faint sound echoed through the room, a low, rhythmic chant, just as Penelope had described. Eleanor froze, her eyes wide. "It's happening again," she whispered. Poirot, however, was unfazed. "Fear not, madame," he said, striding to the wall where the speaker had been. He tapped it again, but the sound persisted, coming from elsewhere in the room. He followed it, his ears attuned, until he reached the fireplace. Kneeling, he peered up the chimney, where a faint glint caught his eye. With a handkerchief, he retrieved a small, metallic object, a second speaker, smaller than the first, wedged into the flue. "Mon Dieu," he muttered, examining it. "Someone is most determined to keep this curse alive." He turned to Eleanor, who looked on the verge of fainting. "Madame, this is no ghost. This is human cunning, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover it. The Star of Anubis is close, I can feel it." The night wore on, and Poirot spent hours poring over the new clues. The second speaker suggested a deeper plot, one that required access to the manor's hidden spaces. Clara remained as primary suspect, but he could not discount Penelope's knowledge of the passages or Hargrove's financial motives. Victor's temper and debts made him a wild card, but his brashness seemed ill-suited to such a subtle scheme. As dawn broke over the moors, Poirot stood at the study window, watching the mist swirl. The curse was debunked, the speakers exposed, but the star remained hidden. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work. The scratch on the window, the passages, the speakers, the guardian's mark, they were all threads in a tapestry, and he was close to seeing the pattern. The chapter closed with Poirot returning to his notebook, sketching a diagram of the study and its secrets. He was satisfied, for now, that he had dismantled the ghostly ruse. The truth, he knew, lay in human greed, fear, or ambition. With a final flourish of his pen, he wrote, "The Star of Anubis is not lost. It is hidden, and I shall find it." Chapter 7. A dangerous discovery. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly beyond Ashburn Manor, their misty expanse swallowing the late afternoon light as Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the grand drawing-room, gazing out through the tall, arched windows. The air inside was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the walls like damp rot, fed by the secrets each guest harbored. The theft of the Star of Anubis had unraveled the thin veneer of civility among the household, and Poirot's little gray cells were humming with the weight of new discoveries. The manor, with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, seemed to whisper its own complicity in the crime, and Poirot was determined to wrest its secrets into the light. He adjusted his immaculate tie, the gesture a small ritual to center his thoughts, and turned to the room where Lady Eleanor Ashburn sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her fingers clasped tightly around a porcelain teacup. Her nephew, Victor, slouched in a corner, his eyes darting nervously as he lit another cigarette, the smoke curling upward like a question mark. Clara, the maid, moved silently, clearing away the tea tray, her face a mask of practiced deference. Though Poirot had caught the flicker of unease in her eyes earlier, Mr. Hargrove, the brash American businessman, stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders squared as if bracing for a fight, while Dr. Penelope Wren, the archaeologist, sat at a small writing desk, her pencil scratching faintly against a notebook, her expression distant, yet guarded. The events of the previous night, the discovery of the manor's secret passages, and Penelope's dubious explanation had shifted the dynamics of the investigation. Poirot knew the Star of Anubis was not merely a stolen artifact, but a catalyst that had exposed the fault lines of greed, desperation, and hidden agendas among the guests. The revelation of the passages had been a breakthrough, but it also complicated the puzzle. If the thief had used the manor's hidden arteries to move unseen, then alibis were meaningless, and every guest was a suspect anew. Yet Poirot's instincts told him the answer lay not only in the mechanics of the theft, but in the human frailties driving it. He decided to begin the day by shadowing Clara, whose cryptic note about debts repaid had lingered in his mind like an unresolved chord. Her role as the manor's maid gave her unparalleled access to its rooms and secrets, and her nervous demeanor suggested she was hiding more than she let on. Poirot found her in the kitchen, her hands busy polishing silver, though her movements were mechanical, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "A moment, if you please." Clara started, nearly dropping a spoon, and turned to face him, her eyes wide. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't hear you come in." "Nong, nong. I move quietly when it suits me," he said, offering a small smile to ease her tension. "You have served Lady Eleanor for many years." "N'est-ce pas?" "5 years, sir," Clara replied, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly as she set the spoon down. "She's been good to me. And yet," Poirot continued, stepping closer, his eyes fixed on hers, "there is something that troubles you, something that makes you drop notes and look over your shoulder. Tell me, what is this debt repaid that you wrote of?" Clara's face paled, and she glanced toward the kitchen door as if expecting someone to burst through. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she said, but her voice cracked, betraying her. Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly. Come, mademoiselle. Hercule Poirot does not ask questions to which he does not already know part of the answer. The note, it was not meant for my eyes, but I have seen it, and it speaks of secrets. You will tell me, or I shall be forced to draw conclusions that may not favor you. Clara's shoulders slumped, and she leaned against the counter, her hands gripping the edge. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "I didn't steal the star. I swear it." "Then what?" Poirot pressed, his tone gentle but insistent. "What debt, and to whom?" She hesitated, then spoke in a rush, as if the words had been bottled up too long. "It's Mr. Hargrove. He's been pressuring me. He knows things about my past, things I'd rather no one knew. I used to run with a rough crowd before I came here. Small thefts, nothing big, but enough to ruin me if Lady Eleanor found out. Hargrove found out somehow, and he's been holding it over me, saying I owe him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And what does he ask of you, this Monsieur Hargrove?" Clara swallowed hard. "He wanted my help to get into the study. Said he needed the star for a deal. Something about a collector in London. I didn't do it, I swear. I told him no, but he kept pushing, saying he'd tell Lady Eleanor everything if I didn't help." Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing. Hargrove's interest in the star had been evident from the start, his brash demeanor masking a calculated ambition. But Clara's story suggested a deeper layer of coercion, one that implicated her not as the thief, but as a reluctant accomplicer, a potential scapegoat. In this note, he asked, "It was a reminder to myself," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "I wrote it to steel myself, to say I wouldn't let him control me any more. I was going to tell Lady Eleanor everything, but then the star went missing, and I was afraid it'd look like I did it." Poirot studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "Merci, Mademoiselle Clara, you have been most helpful. For now, you will say nothing of this to anyone. Hercule Poirot will handle Monsieur Hargrove." Relief flickered across Clara's face, though her eyes remained wary. Poirot turned to leave the kitchen, his mind already turning to Hargrove. The American's motives were clear: profit, power, perhaps both, but his methods were becoming more troubling. If he was blackmailing Clara, what else might he be capable of? And how did his actions intersect with the secret passages or the staged curse of the star? Poirot decided to confront Hargrove directly, but first, he needed to verify Clara's story. The manor's attic, where old records and forgotten relics were stored, might hold clues about her past or Hargrove's schemes. He made his way up the narrow, creaking staircase, the air growing colder and dustier with each step. The attic was a labyrinth of crates, trunks, and cobwebbed furniture, lit only by a single skylight that cast long shadows across the floor. He began searching methodically, his gloved hands moving carefully through piles of old letters and ledgers. After nearly an hour, he found a small, locked journal tucked inside a dusty sewing box. The lock was simple, and Poirot, with a deft twist of a paperclip, opened it. The journal belonged to Clara, its pages filled with hurried scrawls about her life before Ashbourne Manor. She had indeed been involved in petty theft, but the entries also spoke of her determination to reform, her gratitude to Eleanor for giving her a chance, and, more recently, her fear of Hargrove's threats. One entry caught Poirot's eye. "He says the star will make him rich, but he needs my hands to get it. I won't do it. I won't." Poirot closed the journal, his expression grim. Clara's story held, but it painted Hargrove as a dangerous manipulator. He slipped the journal into his pocket, intending to return it later, and was about to leave when he heard a faint creak behind a stack of crates. He froze, his senses sharp, and called out, "Who is there? Show yourself, if you please." Silence answered, but then a figure emerged from the shadows. Hargrove, his face flushed and his hands clenched. "Poirot," he said, his voice low and edged with irritation. "What the devil are you doing up here, snooping around?" Poirot raised an eyebrow, unruffled. "Monsieur Hargrove, it is not snooping when one seeks the truth, and the truth, I find, is often hidden in places such as this. Perhaps you can explain why you are here." "Nong." Hargrove's jaw tightened. "I was looking for some old business records. Eleanor said I could check the attic for anything related to her estate. I've got investments to consider." "Investments?" Poirot repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. "Or perhaps you seek something else. Something like the Star of Anubis, which you believe will secure your fortune." Hargrove's eyes flashed, but he forced a laugh. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'm no thief. I'm a businessman, and I don't need to skulk around stealing trinkets to make my mark." "Then why," Poirot said, stepping closer, "do you threaten Mademoiselle Clara? Why do you hold her past over her head, demanding her help in your schemes?" Hargrove's face darkened, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might lunge. But the American took a step back, his hands raised. "Clara's been talking, has she? Look, I might have leaned on her a bit, but it was just business. I needed access to the study, sure, but I didn't take the star. I don't even know how to get into those damn passages you keep going on about." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes never leaving Hargrove's. "You protest much, monsieur, but your words lack the ring of truth. We shall see what the night reveals. For now, I suggest you return to the drawing room and refrain from wandering where you are not welcome." Hargrove muttered something under his breath and stormed out, his heavy footsteps echoing down the stairs. Poirot remained in the attic, his mind racing. Hargrove's presence here was no coincidence, but his denial of knowledge about the passages was intriguing. If he was telling the truth, then someone else had used the manor's secrets to steal the star. If he was lying, then he was playing a dangerous game. As evening fell, the manor seemed to close in on itself, the shadows deepening as the wind howled outside. Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the guests were gathered for dinner, their faces a study in unease. Eleanor tried to keep the conversation light, but Victor's sullen silence, Clara's nervous glances, Penelope's distracted sketching, and Hargrove's forced joviality created a palpable tension. Poirot observed them all, his mind piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. After dinner, as the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered in the hallway, his thoughts turning to the moors. Hargrove's claim that he needed Clara's skills suggested he knew more about the theft than he admitted, but his flighty behavior hinted at fear as much as guilt. Poirot decided to take a calculated risk. He approached Eleanor and requested permission to explore the grounds, citing a need for fresh air to clear his mind. She agreed, though her eyes were wary. The moors were a stark contrast to the manor's claustrophobic elegance, their wild expanse both exhilarating and foreboding. Poirot, dressed in his overcoat and scarf, moved carefully along a narrow path, his flashlight cutting through the mist. He had no clear destination, only a hunch that the answer to the theft might lie beyond the manor's walls. The Star of Anubis, with its cursed reputation, had drawn attention from beyond Ashburn, and Poirot wondered if an outsider or an accomplice lurked in the shadows. He had been walking for nearly 20 minutes when he heard a rustling in the underbrush. He stopped, his senses alert, and called out, "Who is there?" "Hercule Poirot demands you show yourself." A figure stumbled into view, and Poirot's flashlight revealed Hargrove, his face pale and his coat muddied. "Poirot," he gasped, his voice trembling, "I saw it out there, in the mist, a figure, holding something that glowed, like the star. I swear it wasn't human." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Hargrove, you expect me to believe in phantoms. Come, you will return to the manor, and we shall discuss this properly." Hargrove protested, but Poirot's tone brooked no argument. They returned to the manor, where Eleanor and the others were waiting, their faces a mix of curiosity and alarm. Hargrove recounted his story, his voice shaking as he described the glowing figure. Victor scoffed, calling it nonsense, while Penelope's eyes widened and Clara clutched her apron, her knuckles white. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Mies Amos, there is no need for panic. What Monsieur Hargrove saw was not a ghost, but a trick, perhaps, or a misapprehension. The Star of Anubis is a prize worth many deceptions, and Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth. For now, we shall organize a search of the grounds, but it will be methodical, not driven by fear." He assigned tasks, sending Victor and the gardener to check the eastern path, Penelope and Clara to the western, and himself with Hargrove to the northern boundary. Eleanor remained at the manor, coordinating from the drawing room. The search was cold, wet, and fruitless, the mist swallowing their efforts as thoroughly as it had the moors. But Poirot's mind was not on the search itself, it was on Hargrove's story. The American's fear seemed genuine, but Poirot suspected it was a performance, a distraction from his own guilt. Or perhaps someone else was orchestrating the drama, using the moors to keep the household off balance. As the search party returned, weary and empty-handed, Poirot gathered them in the drawing room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "the night has revealed much, but not all. The Star of Anubis remains hidden, but Hercule Poirot is not deterred. Tomorrow, we shall tighten the net, and the thief will find no escape." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but Poirot's steady gaze reassured them, if only slightly. He retired to his room, his mind alight with possibilities. Clara's confession, Hargrove's encounter, and the manor's secrets were converging, and Poirot felt the truth within reach. He sat at his desk, sketching a diagram of the manor's passages and the grounds, marking where Hargrove claimed to have seen the figure. The star was close, he could feel it, and with it, the answer to the puzzle that had brought him to this misty, treacherous place. As he prepared for bed, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The case was complex, but complexity was his domain. The thief, whoever they were, had underestimated Hercule Poirot, and that, he knew, was their gravest mistake. Chapter 8. The trap. Is Seth morning mist clung to Ashbourne Manor like a shroud, curling around the ivy-clad walls and pooling in the hollows of the Yorkshire moors. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the grand drawing-room, his polished shoes gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through the tall, mullioned windows. His small, fastidious hands were clasped behind his back, and his head tilted slightly as he surveyed the room with the precision of a watchmaker examining a delicate mechanism. The guests, still shaken from the previous day's revelations, were scattered about the manor, their nerves frayed like the edges of an old tapestry. The disappearance of the star of Anubis had cast a long shadow over the household, and Poirot knew the time had come to tighten the net. He had spent the early hours of the morning in quiet consultation with the gardener, Mr. Thomas Grimsby, a wiry man with a face like weathered oak and eyes that miss little. Grimsby, though not a guest, had proven an invaluable ally, his knowledge of the manor's grounds and his unobtrusive presence making him the perfect observer. Poirot had enlisted him to watch the study, where the priceless artifact had vanished, and now he was ready to set his trap. The plan was simple yet elegant, as all of Poirot's schemes were. He would announce to the household that he had discovered the star of Anubis, claiming it had been hidden in plain sight all along. He would declare that he intended to reveal its location at dinner that evening, under the pretense of ensuring its safe return to Lady Eleanor Ashbourne. In truth, the artifact remained missing, but Poirot had procured a convincing replica glass bauble painted with meticulous care to mimic the star's obsidian sheen and golden inlays. This fake would be placed in the study, under the watchful eyes of Grimsby and another trusted ally, the butler, Mr. Reginald Stokes. If the thief took the bait, they would be caught in the act, their desperation betraying them. Poirot adjusted his mustache, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. The criminal mind, he murmured to himself, is predictable in its unpredictability. It is a paradox, n'est-ce pas, but one that Hercule Poirot understands. The morning passed in a flurry of preparations. Poirot met with Stokes in the pantry, a cramped room smelling of polished silver and beeswax. The butler, a tall man with a stiff posture and a perpetually furrowed brow, listened intently as Poirot outlined his role. You will remain near the study, Monsieur Stokes, Poirot instructed, his voice low but clear. You must be invisible, yet vigilant. The thief will move swiftly, but they will not expect you. Stokes nodded, his expression unchanging. I understand, Mr. Poirot. I'll see to it no one gets past without notice. Bien, Poirot said, clapping his hands together. And you must ensure the household believes the star has been found. Let slip a word or two carelessly, you understand, to the maids. Gossip travels faster than the wind in a place like this. Stokes allowed a rare flicker of amusement to cross his face. The maids will have it spread by luncheon. Sir, satisfied, Poirot turned his attention to the study. The room was as he had last seen it, a heavy oak desk dominating the center, bookshelves lining the walls, and the tall window with its faint, telling scratch. He placed the fake star in a velvet-lined box, positioning it on the desk where it caught the light just so. The scratch on the window frame, he noted again, was too precise to be accidental, a clue that still nagged at his little gray cells. But for now, the trap took precedence. As the clock struck noon, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing-room. Lady Eleanor sat in her high-backed chair, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier, her expression a mix of hope and apprehension. Victor Ashbourne, her nephew, slouched near the fireplace, his sullen demeanor barely masking his unease. Clara, The maid stood by the door, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting nervously. Mr. Hargrove, the American businessman, paced near the window, his brash confidence tempered by the weight of suspicion. Dr. Penelope Wren, the archaeologist, sat primly on a settee, her sketchbook clutched to her chest like a shield. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice carrying the authority of a conductor addressing an orchestra, "I have the pleasure to inform you that the star of Anubis has been found." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. Victor's eyes narrowed. Clara's fingers tightened. Hargrove stopped pacing, and Penelope's sketchbook slipped an inch. "Found," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with relief. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, where was it?" Poirot raised a hand, his eyes gleaming with calculated calm. "It was hidden, madame, in a place most clever. But I shall not reveal its location until this evening, at dinner, when all may witness its return. For now, it is safe, and that is enough." Victor snorted, crossing his arms. "Convenient, Poirot. You expect us to just sit here and wait?" "Oui, Monsieur Ashburn," Poirot replied, his tone smooth as silk. "Patience is a virtue, is it not? And the truth, it has a way of revealing itself when the moment is right." Hargrove stepped forward, his jaw set. "I don't like this. Poirot, if you've got the thing, show it now. No need for theatrics." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Theatrics, Monsieur Hargrove? Non, non. This is merely method. You will see. All will be clear." Penelope's voice, soft but sharp, cut through the tension. "And what if someone tries to take it again before tonight?" Poirot turned to her, his gaze piercing. "An excellent question, Mademoiselle Wren, but rest assured, the star is under my protection. No one shall touch it without my knowledge." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the guests like dust. He excused himself, leaving them to their whispered speculations, and retreated to the library to refine his plan. The trap was set, but the thief's next move was uncertain. Would it be Victor, driven by his debts, Clara, coerced by blackmail, Hargrove, with his shady motives, or Penelope, whose map of the manor's passages suggested deeper knowledge? Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the puzzle. The afternoon dragged on, the manor thick with tension. Poirot kept to himself, observing from a distance. He noted Clara's frequent glances toward the study, Victor's restless pacing, Hargrove's terse conversations with Eleanor, and Penelope's sudden interest in the manor's architecture. Each movement, each glance, was a thread in the tapestry. Poirot was weaving as evening approached. The household gathered for dinner in the grand dining room. The long mahogany table gleamed under candlelight, its surface reflecting the strained faces of the guests. Eleanor sat at the head, her composure regal but brittle. Victor slouched to her left, his fingers drumming on the table. Clara served the meal with mechanical precision, her eyes avoiding Poirot's. Hargrove sat opposite Victor, his fork stabbing at his plate with unnecessary force. Penelope, at the far end, seemed lost in thought, her fork untouched. Poirot rose, his glass of wine untouched, and addressed the room. "Mies Amos, the moment has come. The star of Anubis, as I promised, will be revealed. It is, at this very moment, in the study, secure and waiting for its rightful owner." The silence was electric. Eleanor's eyes shone with anticipation. Victor's fingers stilled. Clara's tray wobbled slightly. Hargrove's jaw tightened, and Penelope's gaze flicked toward the door. "But," Poirot continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I must ensure its safety. Monsieur Stokes and Monsieur Grimsby are watching the study. If anyone attempts to take the star, they will be seen." A murmur ran through the room, quickly stifled. Poirot sat, his eyes scanning the faces around him. The trap was baited, and now he waited. The meal proceeded in strained silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and the occasional forced remark. Poirot ate sparingly, his attention fixed on the subtle cues of his suspects. Victor's leg bounced under the table, Clara's hands trembled as she poured wine, Hargrove's eyes darted toward the hall, and Penelope's fingers traced patterns on her napkin. Halfway through the main course, Victor pushed his chair back abruptly. "Excuse me," he muttered, standing. "I need some air." Poirot's eyes followed him, his expression unreadable. "Of course, Monsieur Ashburn. The moors are lovely this evening." Victor hesitated, then strode toward the door. Poirot nodded almost imperceptibly to Stokes, who slipped out after him. The remaining guests exchanged uneasy glances, their appetites waning. Minutes later, a shout echoed from the hall. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, moving with surprising speed for a man of his stature. The others followed, their chairs scraping against the floor. They reached the study to find Grimsby holding Victor by the arm, the young man's face flushed with anger. He was at the desk, Grimsby said, his voice gruff. "Caught him red-handed. Trying to open that box?" Victor yanked his arm free, his eyes blazing. "This is nonsense. I wasn't stealing anything. I wanted to see if it was really there." Poirot stepped forward, his calm unshaken. "Monsieur Ashburn, you are most impatient. Did I not say the star would be revealed at dinner's end?" Victor's jaw worked, but no words came. The others crowded into the study, their voices overlapping in accusation and defense. Eleanor clutched her shawl, her face pale. "Victor, how could you?" "I didn't do it," Victor snapped. "I swear, I just wanted to look." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Let us see." Then, he opened the velvet box on the desk, revealing the glittering fake star. The guests gasped, their eyes fixed on the bauble. Poirot's gaze, however, was elsewhere on the faces around him, searching for a telltale reaction. Before anyone could speak, a piercing scream cut through the air. It came from Clara, who stood frozen near the window, her eyes wide with horror. "It's gone," she cried, pointing at the desk. Poirot turned, his heart sinking for a fraction of a second. The box was empty. The fake star had vanished. The room erupted in chaos. Eleanor clutched at Stokes, demanding answers. Victor shouted accusations at Hargrove, who bellowed back. Penelope backed away, her sketchbook falling to the floor. Clara sank to her knees, sobbing. Poirot alone remained calm, his eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction. "Mies Amos," he said, his voice cutting through the din, "do not despair. The star was never here." The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Eleanor's voice trembled. "What do you mean, Mr. Poirot?" He smiled, a cat-like curl of his lips. "This was a trap, madame. The star in that box was a replica, designed to draw out the thief, and it has done so." He turned to Victor, who stood rigid, his face pale. "Monsieur Ashburn, you were quick to act, but not quick enough. And yet, I suspect you are not the only one with secrets." Victor's eyes widened. "I told you, I didn't take it. I didn't even know it was fake." Poirot's gaze shifted, to Clara, then Hargrove, then Penelope. "The true thief," he said softly, "is one who knew the star was false yet acted anyway. Their desperation has betrayed them." The room held its breath, waiting for Poirot to name the culprit. But he merely inclined his head, his smile enigmatic. "Dinner is not yet over, Mies Amos. Let us return to the table. The truth, it will come." As they filed out, Poirot lingered, his eyes on the empty box. The trap had worked, but not as he had expected. The thief had moved faster than anticipated, and the game was far from over. Yet Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The net was tightening, and the truth was within reach. The dinner resumed, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Victor sat sullenly, avoiding his aunt's gaze. Clara served with mechanical precision, her face a mask. Hargrove's bluster had faded, his eyes darting nervously. Penelope clutched her napkin, her knuckles white. Eleanor, at the head of the table, looked as though she might faint. Poirot sipped his wine, his mind racing. The disappearance of the fake star was a bold move, one that suggested the thief was either supremely confident or dangerously desperate. He replayed the evening's events: Victor's attempt to reach the study, Clara's scream, the empty box, the scratch on the window frame nagged at him still, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. As dessert was served, Poirot leaned toward Eleanor, his voice low. "Madame, I assure you, all is under control. The star will be returned." And the thief unmasked. Eleanor's eyes searched his. "You're certain, Mr. Poirot?" "Certain," he replied, his tone firm. "The little gray cells, they do not fail." The meal ended in uneasy silence, the guests retiring to their rooms with murmurs of unease. Poirot remained in the dining room, his fingers steepled, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Grimsby and Stokes joined him, reporting no further disturbances. The fake star's disappearance was a mystery within a mystery, but Poirot was undeterred. He returned to the study, examining the room once more. The scratch on the window frame drew his eye again, its precision mocking him. He ran a finger along it, his mind racing. "A tool," he murmured, "a tool most specific, but whose?" The night deepened, the manor settling into an uneasy quiet. Poirot paced the study, his thoughts a symphony of deduction. The trap had exposed Victor's impulsiveness, but the true thief remained elusive. Clara's scream, Hargrove's nerves, Penelope's silence, each was a note in the melody of deception. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot paused, his eyes narrowing. A faint sound reached his ears, a creak, soft but unmistakable, from the hall. He moved silently to the door, his hand on the knob. The trap had not failed, it had merely shifted the game. He opened the door, peering into the darkened hall. A shadow moved, swift and silent, toward the east wing. Poirot followed, his steps light, his senses alert. The shadow paused at a corner, then slipped into a room. Poirot crept closer, his heart steady despite the thrill of the chase. The room was Penelope's. Poirot hesitated, then pushed the door open. She stood by her desk, her back to him, a small object in her hands. The fake star glittered in the lamplight. "Mademoiselle Wren," Poirot said softly, stepping inside. Penelope spun, her face pale, the star slipping from her fingers. It hit the floor with a soft clink, rolling under the desk. "Mr. Poirot," she gasped, I can explain." Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but unyielding. "Explain, mademoiselle, but know that Hercule Poirot sees all." She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "I didn't steal the real star. I swear it. I took the fake because I knew it wasn't real. I wanted to prove I could find it, to show I wasn't involved." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A curious defense, mademoiselle, and yet you knew the star was false." How Penelope hesitated, then sighed. "I overheard you speaking with Stokes this morning. You mentioned the replica. I thought, if I could get to it first, I could clear my name." Poirot studied her, his mind weighing her words. "And the map of the passages, the sketchbook, the whispers in the study." Her eyes widened. "You know about the map?" "Oui," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. "I know much, mademoiselle, and I suspect more." Penelope's shoulders slumped. "I found the map in the library, hidden in an old book. I thought it might lead to the star." "The whispers?" "I don't know. I heard them, but I didn't make them." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Penelope's story was plausible, but incomplete. The true thief was still out there, and the fake star's disappearance had only deepened the mystery. Yet Poirot felt a spark of triumph. The trap had flushed out one truth, and others would follow. He retrieved the fake star from under the desk, holding it up to the light. "This, mademoiselle, was a test. You have passed, in a manner of speaking. But the game is not over." Penelope's eyes searched his. "What happens now?" "Now," Poirot said, pocketing the fake star, "we return to the truth. Sleep. Mademoiselle, tomorrow, all will be clear." He left her room, the fake star secure in his pocket. The manor was silent, but the air thrummed with secrets. Poirot returned to his own room, his mind a whirlwind of clues and contradictions. The scratch on the window, the hidden passages, the staged curse, the fake star's theft each was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was close to seeing the whole dot as he lay in bed, the darkness pressing against the windows. Poirot smiled to himself. The trap had worked, not as he had planned, but better. The thief had revealed their hand, and Hercule Poirot was ready to call their bluff. The night passed without further incident, but Poirot slept little, his mind alive with possibilities. By morning, he was up, his suit immaculate, his mustache perfectly groomed. He met Grimsby in the garden, the old man's eyes sharp despite the early hour. "Anything, Mr. Poirot?" Grimsby asked, leaning on his rake. "Oui, Monsieur Grimsby," Poirot replied, his voice low. "The trap has caught a fish, but not the one we sought. Tonight, we try again." Grimsby nodded, his face unreadable. "I'll be ready, sir." Poirot spent the day in quiet observation, watching the guests as they moved through the manor. Victor avoided him, his sullenness tinged with fear. Clara's hands shook as she dusted, her eyes darting to every shadow. Hargrove's bluster had returned, but it rang hollow. Penelope kept to her room, her sketchbook abandoned. As evening fell, Poirot gathered the household once more. "Mes Amos," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "the star remains safe, despite last night's excitement. Tonight, we shall try again. The truth, it is near." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. Poirot excused himself, slipping away to the study. He placed the fake star back in its box, ensuring Grimsby and Stokes were in position. The trap was reset, and this time Poirot would be watching. Dinner was a repeat of the previous night, the tension thicker than the fog outside. Poirot ate little, his eyes never leaving the guests. Victor's leg bounced, Clara's hands trembled, Hargrove's jaw twitched, and Penelope's gaze was fixed on her plate. As the clock struck 9, a faint noise came from the hall, a soft thud, like a footfall on carpet. Poirot was on his feet, the others following. They reached the study to find the box open, the fake star gone again. This time, Poirot's smile was triumphant. "Mes Amos," he said, turning to the stunned guests, "the thief has struck again. But this time, Hercule Poirot is ready." He moved to the window, his fingers tracing the scratch. "This mark," he said, his voice low, "is the key, a tool, precise and deliberate. And I know whose hand wielded it." The room was silent, every eye on Poirot. He turned, his gaze locking on to Hargrove. "Monsieur Hargrove, you are a man of business, oui, but also a man of tools. A jeweler's tool, perhaps, to mark a window for entry." Hargrove's face paled. "That's absurd. I've never—" Poirot raised a hand. "We shall see, monsieur." "Grimsby, if you please." Grimsby stepped forward, holding the fake star. "Found it in the garden, sir. Just where you said to look." Hargrove's eyes widened, his bluster gone. "I don't know how that got there." Chapter 9. Poirot's odd mistaked grand dining room of Ashbourne Manor was heavy with tension, its high ceilings and ornate chandelier doing little to dispel the oppressive air. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflected the flickering candle light, casting distorted shadows on the faces of the gathered guests. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small, meticulous figure commanding the room despite his unassuming stature. His neatly trimmed mustache twitched slightly as he surveyed the assembly. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, her face pale, but composed. Victor, her nephew, slouched in his chair with a sullen scowl. Clara, the maid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mr. Hargrove, the brash American, fidgeting with his cufflinks. And Dr. Penelope Wren, her eyes darting nervously behind her spectacles. The gardener, Mr. Tompkins, stood discreetly near the door, his weathered face impassive but alert, ready to assist Poirot as instructed. The events of the previous evening, the trap Poirot had set with the fake artifact, had left the household in disarray. The disappearance of the decoy star of Anubis from the study had confirmed Poirot's suspicions. The thief was still among them, desperate and bold. Now, as the clock struck 8, the moment had come for Poirot to lay bare the truth, or so he believed. Ms. Amos, Poirot began, his voice clear and precise, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. We have gathered this evening to resolve the mystery of the Star of Anubis, a priceless artifact stolen from this very manor under the most curious circumstances. A locked room, a cast of suspects, and a web of motives set magnifique. Non, a puzzle worthy of Hercule Poirot. But tonight, I shall reveal not only the thief, but also the intricate threads of deception that have entangled us all. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes flickering toward one another, searching for signs of guilt. Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, his little gray cells humming with the connections he had painstakingly pieced together over the past days. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, a gesture of calm assurance, and continued, "Let us begin with the facts," he said, pacing slowly along the table, his polished shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor. The Star of Anubis, a relic of ancient Egypt, was taken from Lady Eleanor's study, a room locked from the inside, with no apparent means of entry or exit. The window, you recall, bore a faint scratch to precise, I noted, to be accidental. The alibis of our company were, shall we say, less than satisfactory. Monsieur Victor was seen near the study. Mademoiselle Clara claimed to be cleaning. Monsieur Hargrove was in the library, and Dr. Wren was sketching in the garden. Each of you had motive, opportunity, and, perhaps, the cunning to execute such a theft. Victor snorted, crossing his arms. This is absurd, Poirot. You've been spinning theories all week, and now you're accusing everyone. Get to the point. Poirot raised a finger, his eyes gleaming with quiet authority. Patience, Monsieur Victor. The point, as you call it, is near. But first, we must consider the trap I set last night. I announced that I had recovered the star and placed it in the study, under observation. The thief, unable to resist, attempted to steal it once, more only to find it was a forgery. This act of desperation confirmed that the true culprit is among us, and their actions have betrayed them. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly. Monsieur Poirot, please tell us who it is. This uncertainty is unbearable. Poirot nodded, his expression softening for a moment. Oui, madame, I understand. Let us proceed to the heart of the matter. I have observed, I have questioned, and I have reflected. The evidence points to one individual whose motives and actions align perfectly with the crime. Monsieur Hargrove, it is you who stole the Star of Anubis. A gasp rippled through the room. Hargrove's face flushed red, his hands slamming onto the table as he lurched to his feet. That's preposterous, he bellowed, his American accent thick with indignation. You've got no proof. Poirot, I was in the library when the thing went missing, and you know it. Poirot remained unruffled, his hands clasped behind his back. Monsieur Hargrove, your protestations are noted, but let us examine the facts. Your pocket watch, which I observed during our reenactment, was set to the wrong time, a curious detail. Non. It suggested you had manipulated your alibi, claiming to be in the library when, in fact, you were elsewhere. Your financial troubles, revealed through Mademoiselle Clara's journal, indicate a desperate need for funds. The star, a priceless artifact, would secure a lucrative deal with your less than reputable associates. And then, there is the matter of your flight into the moors last night, after I confronted Mademoiselle Clara about your blackmail. You claim to have seen a figure with the star, a convenient tale to deflect suspicion. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I didn't touch that artifact, and I've got someone who can prove it. He turned toward the door, raising his voice. Tompkins, call in the vicar. The gardener hesitated, glancing at Poirot, who gave a slight nod. Tompkins stepped out, and moments later, the door opened to admit a frail, white-haired man in clerical garb, the local vicar, Mr. Ellison. The room fell silent as he shuffled forward, clutching a worn Bible, his eyes blinking nervously behind thick glasses. "Monsieur Ellison," Poirot said, his tone courteous but probing, "you have something to tell us?" The vicar cleared his throat, his voice quavering. "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot. On the night the artifact was stolen, Mr. Hargrove was with me at the vicarage. We were discussing a charitable donation for the church's restoration fund. He arrived at 7 o'clock and stayed until well past 9. He could not have been at the manor when the theft occurred." Poirot's mustache twitched, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The guests exchanged glances, sensing a crack in the detective's uncheckable confidence. Victor smirked, leaning back in his chair, while Clara's hands tightened in her lap. Penelope adjusted her spectacles, her expression unreadable. "Is this true, Monsieur Hargrove?" Poirot asked, his voice steady but his eyes narrowing. "Damn right it is," Hargrove snapped, folding his arms. "I told you I was in the library, but I didn't mention I'd stepped out to see the vicar earlier. My watch, it's been broken for weeks, hasn't kept time since I dropped it in London. You've built your whole case on a busted ticker." Poirot. The room seemed to hold its breath. Poirot stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Hargrove, then shifting to the vicar, who nodded earnestly. The detective's mind raced, replaying every detail, every assumption. The watch's cornerstone clue had been a misstep. It was not tampered with, it was simply broken. A rare mistake for Hercule Poirot, whose little gray cells seldom faltered. Yet, he would not be undone by a single error. "Very well," Poirot said at last, his voice calm but carrying a steely edge. "I can see that I have misread the significance of the watch. It was, perhaps, an odd mistake. But the truth, mise Amos, does not hinge on a single clue. The star of Anubis remains hidden, and the thief is still among us. Let us turn our attention elsewhere." He pivoted smoothly, his eyes locking onto Penelope Wren, who stiffened in her chair. "Dr. Wren," he said, his tone deceptively gentle, "you have been most intriguing. Your map of the manor's secret passages, discovered in your room, suggests a knowledge of Ashbourne Manor far beyond that of a mere guest. Your research, you claimed, depends on the star, yet you swore you did not steal it. But let us consider. Who else could navigate those hidden corridors with such precision? Who else had the motive to study the artifact in secret, away from prying eyes?" Penelope's face paled, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Monsieur Poirot, I've told you I was searching for my sketchbook that night. The map was for my research, to understand the manor's history. I didn't take the star." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Your sketchbook, mademoiselle, has not been seen since you mentioned it, and your research, how convenient that it requires the very artifact that has vanished. The passages, the staged curse with the hidden speaker, the whispers you claim to hear all point to a plan to distract and deceive. You used the manor's secrets to steal the star, hiding it to study at your leisure, believing no one would suspect the nervous archaeologist." The room erupted in murmurs. Victor leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Penelope, you're saying she's the thief?" Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Dr. Wren, is this true?" Penelope's composure cracked, her eyes filling with tears. "No, I mean yes, but not the way you think." She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "I took the star? Yes, but only to study it. I wasn't going to sell it or keep it. My career, my life's work depends on understanding that artifact. I used the passages to get into the study, and I hid the star in the attic, behind a loose panel. I was going to return it, I swear." Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Mademoiselle, your intentions, however noble, do not excuse the theft. You manipulated the fears of this household, staging a ghostly ruse to keep others at bay. The scratch on the window, a distraction, created to mislead. The star was never at risk of leaving the manor. It was here, under our noses, because you could not bear to part with it." Penelope sank back into her chair, sobbing softly. Clara reached out, hesitating, then placed a hand on her shoulder. Hargrove, still bristling, muttered, "Well, I'll be damned. The quiet ones always surprise you." Poirot turned to Eleanor, his demeanor calm once more. "Madame, with your permission, I shall retrieve the star from its hiding place. The case, though marked by my own error, is resolved." Eleanor nodded, her voice steady despite the ordeal. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, bring it back." Poirot gestured to Tompkins, who followed him out of the dining room. The guests remained silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them. In the attic, guided by Penelope's tearful directions, Poirot found the loose panel behind a stack of dusty crates. There, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was the star of Anubis, a small, gleaming obsidian statue of the jackal-headed god, its eyes set with glittering emeralds. Poirot held it up, the candlelight catching its facets, and allowed himself a small smile. His mistake had been humbling, but it had not defeated him. Returning to the dining room, he placed the artifact before Eleanor, who gasped softly at its beauty. "It is safe, Madame," Poirot said. "The mystery is solved, and order is restored." Penelope, her face streaked with tears, looked up at him. "What happens to me now?" Poirot regarded her with a mix of pity and resolve. "That, mademoiselle, is for Lady Eleanor to decide. But I suspect your honesty, however belated, will weigh in your favor." The room fell quiet, the tension easing like a storm passing. Poirot's gaze swept over the guests, his confidence restored. He had stumbled? Yes, but Hercule Poirot was not one to dwell on errors. The case was closed, and his reputation, though briefly shaken, remained intact. Chapter 10. The final bow. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand drawing-room of Ashbourne Manor, his small, precise figure framed by the towering windows that overlooked the Yorkshire moors. The mist outside clung to the glass, softening the morning light into a pale, ethereal glow. The guests, Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, Victor, Clara, Mr. Hargrove, and Dr. Penelope Rent sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a gallery of apprehension, relief, and lingering guilt. The star of Anubis, the priceless Egyptian artifact that had sparked this intricate puzzle, rested on a velvet cushion atop a mahogany table at Poirot's side, its golden surface catching the light with an almost defiant gleam. The air was thick with anticipation, for Poirot had promised to unveil the full truth of its theft, a truth that had eluded even his meticulous mind until the final hours. Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, his mustache twitching slightly. As he surveyed the room, his eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from one face to another, reading the subtle tells of their emotions. Eleanor's composed dignity, Victor's sullen defiance, Clara's guarded relief, Hargrove's forced bravado, and Penelope's pale, trembling resolve. The case had been a labyrinth of motives, alibis, and deceptions, and Poirot had nearly stumbled a rare misstep that had briefly shaken his confidence. But now, with the threads of the mystery gathered in his hands, he was ready to weave them into a tapestry of truth. "Ms. Amos," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, carrying the weight of authority that silenced the room's faint rustles. "We have arrived at the denouement of this most curious affair, the theft of the star of Anubis, a relic of immense value and, it seems, even greater temptation. The events of this weekend have tested the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot, and I confess, there was a moment where even I, Poirot, made an error. But fear not, for the truth has been uncovered, and the guilty party stands revealed." A murmur rippled through the group, quickly hushed as Poirot raised a hand. "Let us begin at the beginning," he said, pacing slowly before the table. "The star of Anubis, a golden amulet said to carry the curse of an ancient god, was taken from Lady Eleanor's study, a room locked from the inside, with no apparent means of entry or exit. The circumstances suggested an impossibility, a puzzle worthy of Poirot's intellect. Yet, as I examined the scene, I found a clue, a faint scratch on the window frame, precise and deliberate. This was no accident, no casual mark, it was the First thread in the unraveling of this mystery. He paused, his gaze settling on Victor, whose jaw tightened. Monsieur Victor, you were seen near the study that night, were you not? Your debts, your expectation of Lady Eleanor's inheritance, these gave you motive. But your movements were too clumsy, too easily noticed. The gardener's testimony placed you at the window, yet the scratch was not your doing. No, it required a subtler hand. Victor shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Eleanor, who watched him with a mix of disappointment and pity. Poirot continued, turning to Clara, Mademoiselle Clara, the loyal maid, or so it seemed. Your knowledge of the manor's secrets, its hidden passages, its quirks made you a suspect. And then there was the note. Debts were paid, dropped in a moment of carelessness. Were you repaying a debt to Lady Eleanor, or to another? Your past as a reformed thief, known to Monsieur Hargrove, suggested blackmail. But again, the pieces did not fit perfectly. Your actions were those of one coerced, not one who planned the theft. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, her face pale but resolute. Poirot's eyes moved to Hargrove, whose brash demeanor had softened into something akin to unease. Monsieur Hargrove, the American businessman with ambitions for the Star, your pocket watch, set to the wrong time, suggested an attempt to manipulate your alibi. Your desire to possess the artifact for a lucrative deal was clear, and yet, when confronted, you produced a witness, the vicar, who confirmed your presence elsewhere. A clever move, but one that led me to question my assumptions. Finally, Poirot's gaze settled on Penelope, who sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly. Dr. Wren, the archaeologist whose career hung by a thread. Your map of the manor's secret passages, found in your room, revealed your knowledge of the house's hidden ways. Your claim of searching for a lost sketchbook was unconvincing, and your desperation to study the star gave you a motive as compelling as any. But it was the speaker, hidden in the study's wall, that confirmed my suspicions. The whispers, the so-called curse of Anubis, was a ruse, designed to frighten and distract. Penelope's eyes dropped to the floor, her shoulders trembling. Poirot's voice softened, but only slightly. Let us reconstruct the crime. Step by step, the star was taken from the study, a room locked from within. The thief used the manor's secret passages known to few, but mapped by Dr. Wren to enter and exit undetected. The scratch on the window frame was a deliberate misdirection, planted to suggest an outside intruder. The whispers, amplified by the hidden speaker, were meant to evoke the curse, sowing fear and confusion among the household. And the fake artifact, stolen during my trap, was taken by one who could not resist the lure of the star's return. He turned to the group, his tone firm. Dr. Penelope Wren, it was you who orchestrated this theft. You used your knowledge of the manor and your expertise in antiquities to steal the star, intending to study it in secret, to salvage your faltering career. The passages allowed you to move unseen, the scratch was your red herring, and the curse was your shield, deflecting suspicion onto others. But you underestimated Hercule Poirot. Penelope's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mix of defiance and resignation. I had no choice, she whispered, her voice breaking. My research, my life's work, it was all slipping away. The star was my last chance to prove myself. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was going to return it, I swear. Eleanor rose, her expression a blend of sorrow and compassion. Penelope, you could have asked for my help. The star is not just an object, it's a responsibility, but I understand your desperation. Your work has value, and I will not see it destroyed. Poirot nodded, his eyes softening. Lady Eleanor's generosity is commendable. Dr. Wren, you will donate your research to preserve the star's legacy. As agreed, the artifact is returned, and justice, in its way, is served. He turned to the others, his voice taking on a reflective tone. This case, Ms. Amos, was not without its challenges. Hercule Poirot made a mistake, an odd mistake. As it were, I misread Monsieur Hargrove's watch, assuming it was tampered with when it was merely broken. This error led me down a false path, but it also sharpened my focus. The little gray cells, they do not fail, even when they stumble. They adapt, they learn, and they prevail. Hargrove cleared his throat, his bravado returning. Well, Poirot, you got there in the end. Gotta say, I didn't think anyone could untangle this mess. Victor muttered under his breath. Mess is right. This whole weekend was a disaster. But his tone lacked venom, and he glanced at Eleanor with a hint of remorse. Clara, silent until now, spoke softly. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing the truth. I was afraid, but you've given me a chance to start anew. Poirot inclined his head. The truth, mademoiselle, is always the goal. And now, with the star restored and the guilty revealed, my work here is done. Eleanor stepped forward, her hand extended. Monsieur Poirot, you have my eternal gratitude. Please, stay a few days longer. The moors are beautiful when the mist clears. Poirot smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. Non, Lady Eleanor. The moors, they are charming, but Hercule Poirot has other puzzles awaiting. I must take my leave. The guests dispersed, their secrets laid bare, their tensions eased by the resolution. Victor lingered to speak with Eleanor, perhaps to mend their strained bond. Clara slipped away quietly, her shoulders lighter. Hargrove clapped Poirot on the back, a gesture Poirot endured with a polite grimace, and Penelope, clutching her notebook, promised Eleanor to share her findings, her face a mix of shame and determination. As the manor's heavy doors closed behind him, Poirot stepped into the mist, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. The air was cool, the moors stretching endlessly before him, their secrets hidden in the fog. He adjusted his hat, his mustache curling with a satisfied smile. The case of the Star of Anubis had tested him, but it had also reminded him of his own resilience. A mistake, however rare, was merely a detour on the path to truth. He strolled into the mist, his figure fading into the gray, a solitary detective content with a case well solved, his reputation as unyielding as ever. The Yorkshire moors swallowed him, but Hercule Poirot knew he would emerge again, ready for the next enigma, wherever it might lie. The manor stood silent behind him, its secrets unraveled, its shadows dispelled. The Star of Anubis gleamed once more in its rightful place, a testament to Poirot's triumph and a reminder that even the great detective could falter, only to rise stronger. The mist clung to the Yorkshire moors like a shroud, softening the edges of Ashbourne Manor as Hercule Poirot's carriage rattled away down the winding path. Inside the manor, the echoes of the weekend's drama lingered, but the air felt lighter, as if the resolution of the theft had lifted a weight from the old stone walls. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne stood at the window of her drawing-room, watching the carriage disappear into the fog, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea. The Star of Anubis, now safely returned to its pedestal in the study, seemed to glow with a quiet defiance, as if mocking the turmoil it had caused. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to Poirot's final words, his calm assurance that justice had been served. She admired his precision, his unshakable confidence, even in the face of his admitted mistake. It was a rare thing, she mused, to see a man so secure in his abilities that he could acknowledge a misstep without losing his dignity. She turned from the window, her gaze settling on the artifact. Its golden surface, etched with ancient symbols, held a story far older than the one Poirot had unraveled, a story of gods and curses, of human greed and ambition. She resolved to ensure its legacy was preserved, not as a prize to be coveted, but as a piece of history to be understood. In the hallway, Victor paced, his usual arrogance tempered by the events of the past days. He had come to Ashbourne Manor, expecting to secure his future, to nudge his aunt towards settling her estate in his favor. Instead, he had been exposed as a man driven by desperation, his debts and schemes laid bare. Yet Eleanor's forgiveness, offered quietly after Poirot's departure, had given him pause. Perhaps, he thought, there was a chance to rebuild. to prove he was more than the reckless nephew who had nearly ruined everything. He stopped pacing, straightened his jacket, and headed toward the study to speak with his aunt. The conversation would be difficult, but it was a start. Clara, meanwhile, moved through the manor with a newfound lightness. The weight of Hargrove's blackmail had been lifted, thanks to Poirot's intervention. She had feared her past would define her forever, that her years of reform would mean nothing in the face of exposure. But Poirot had seen her not as a thief, but as a woman caught in a web of others' making. As she polished the silver in the dining room, her hands steady for the first time in days, she allowed herself to imagine a future free of secrets. Perhaps she would stay with Eleanor, or perhaps she would seek a new path. Either way, she felt unburdened, her loyalty to the manor reaffirmed. Mr. Hargrove, ever the opportunist, had already begun plotting his next venture as he packed his bags in the guest wing. The star of Anubis had slipped through his fingers, but he was not a man to dwell on failure. Poirot's accusation had stung, but the vicar's timely alibi had saved him from disgrace. He chuckled to himself, thinking of the detective's meticulous nature. Poirot was good, too good, perhaps, but Hargrove was already looking ahead. There were other deals, other artifacts, other fortunes to chase. He slung his bag over his shoulder and headed for the door, whistling a tune, his confidence unshaken. Dr. Penelope Wren sat alone in her room, her notebook open before her, its pages filled with sketches and notes about the star. The shame of her actions burned, but Eleanor's offer to support her research had kindled a spark of hope. She had crossed a line, driven by fear of obscurity, but the consequences had been gentler than she deserved. Poirot's piercing gaze had seen through her, yet his final words had been kind, urging her to use her knowledge for good. She traced a finger over a drawing of the star, its intricate hieroglyphs a reminder of why she had chosen this path. She would honor Eleanor's trust, sharing her findings to ensure the artifact's story endured. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly, their rolling hills shrouded in mist. The manor, with its secrets and scandals, seemed a world apart from the quiet landscape. Yet the two were intertwined, each shaping the other in ways that only time could reveal. The star of Anubis, now secure, would remain a silent witness to the dramas of Ashbourne Manor, its curse, if it ever existed, dispelled by Poirot's relentless logic. As the day wore on, the manor settled into a quiet rhythm. Servants moved through the halls, preparing for the guests' departure. Eleanor sat with Victor, their conversation halting but earnest, a tentative step toward reconciliation. Clara hummed softly as she worked, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Hargrove's car roared down the drive, kicking up gravel as he left the moors behind. And Penelope, packing her notes, made a silent vow to redeem her mistake, to let her work speak louder than her misdeeds. In the distance, Poirot's carriage emerged from the mist, its wheels creaking as it carried him toward the next mystery. He leaned back against the seat, his eyes half closed, his mind replaying the case. The star of Anubis had been a formidable opponent, its theft wrapped in layers of deception. His mistake misreading Hargrove's watch had been a humbling moment, but it had also sharpened his instincts, reminding him that even the great Hercule Poirot was human. He smiled faintly, his mustache curling. The little gray cells had prevailed, as they always did. The moors faded into the distance, their secrets safe for now. Poirot's thoughts turned to London, to the comfort of his apartment, to the promise of a hot chocolate and a quiet evening. But he knew, deep down, that another puzzle awaited, another challenge to test his intellect. For Hercule Poirot, the world was a tapestry of mysteries, each thread waiting to be unraveled. And he, with his unmatched precision, would be ready. The carriage rolled on, the mist closing in behind it, and Ashbourne Manor stood alone once more, its story complete for now.